Good morning and welcome to the Planning and Placemaking Committee of the 22nd of February 2023. I'm Councillor Ian Massey and I'm the convener of the Planning and Placemaking Committee. Let me introduce you to our top table today. Second on my left is my Vice Convener, Councillor Grant Stewart. To my right is Mr Christian Smith, Development Management and Building Standards Service Manager. Mrs Christine Breen is here, Team Leader. Mr Paul Williamson, Team Leader. Mr Sean Panton, second on my right, Team Leader. Mr Jeff Fogg to my left, and Mr Danny Williams, Committee Officer. Jeff Fogg, by the way, is a solicitor, which I forgot to mention. We have apologies submitted from Councillor Drysdale. As this is a hybrid meeting, joining virtually are reminded that if you leave the meeting during consideration of any application, you are unable to participate or vote on that item when you return to the meeting. This also means that if a member loses their internet connection during consideration of an item, they should not vote on that item. Please advise the clerk via the meeting chat that you are leaving the meeting, or if you have lost your connection and are therefore unable to vote on that item. And whilst we are operating as a hybrid meeting for the proceedings today, can I remind councillors and officers to use the chat box to attract my attention, which all members should have access to. Q for question, C for comment. I will now ask the clerk to advise of the members participating today and for all members to confirm their attendance once their names has been announced by the clerk, so that this is clear in the recording of the meeting and can also be recorded by the clerk for the minute. Danny.
Yes, thank you very much, convener. So if I can just, when I call your name just for the purpose of recording, can you confirm whether you are here for me, please? So, Councillor Anderson.
Present.
Councillor Braun.
Present.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Present.
Councillor Illingworth.
Present.
Councillor James.
Online, Danny. Morning.
Morning, thank you. Councillor Leishman.
Present.
Councillor Massey.
Present.
Bailey McLaren.
Present.
Councillor Reid.
Present.
Councillor Stewart.
Present.
Councillor Waters.
Present, Danny.
Thank you. And Bailey Williamson. Okay, thank you very much, members. So, convener, as you say, we just got the apologies from Councillor Drysdale, so that's everyone who should be in attendance is either in the chambers or online.
Thank you for that. Now move on to declarations of interest. If members could put DI in the chat, please. I see we've got a DI from Councillor Anderson.
Well, it's appropriate or not. It's just that I say item 6.1. I was employed there for nearly 40 years, but it ended about 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, where it still applies, it may not apply today, but may apply when it comes before the actual planning.
Yeah, I think, Councillor Anderson, there's no decision being required to be taken by the committee today, so I think you're fine for today. You're right, it might be different in relation to the actual application in due course, but for today's purposes, there's nothing needs to be done.
Thank you. Now we move on to the minutes of the Planning and Placemaking Committee 25th of January. Can I ask committee members if they agree the contents of the minute?
Agreed.
Thank you. We have a large number of deputations today. We will not go through them all at once. We'll go through them as we approach the applications, if that's okay. But can I ask the committee to agree to hear deputations on the items?
Agreed.
Thank you. Right, we go straight into it. The major application. This is an S42 application to modify condition 3 occupation of dwellings or permission for the 1700847 IPM land 250 metres south-east of Woolmarina, Luncarty, Perth. And to introduce the report is Mr. Panton. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, everyone. As stated, the first item today is a Section 42 application to amend Condition 3 of the in-principle planning permission. Condition 3 requires that the maximum number of dwellings permitted to be occupied by 2024 is 300 dwellings. Furthermore, the condition states that no more than 300 dwellings and 5 hectares of employment land shall be occupied until a scheme for a road infrastructure solutions has been submitted and agreed. The applicant, which in this instance is Stephen Holmes, wishes to amend this condition to increase the permissible development from 300 units to 650 units in advance of a scheme for new infrastructure solutions being required. After extensive discussions with the Council's Transportation and Development team, the team are willing to accept the amendment of the condition from 300 dwellings to 520 dwellings. Whilst this is less than the 650 applied for by Stephen Holmes, the Transportation and Development team consider this as the highest number that can be permitted in advance of a scheme for new infrastructure solutions being required. This is due to the evidence obtained from the survey work which was undertaken. Next slide, please. This aerial shot shows the location of the site in relation to Luncarty. You can see Luncarty itself to the immediate north, the A9 to the immediate west, and the River Tay and some agricultural fields to the south and east. Next slide, please. This plan shows the extent of the existing site in greater detail. The entirety of this site already benefits from planning permission in principle. Next slide, please. This next slide shows the intended master plan for the site. Your attention is drawn towards the red circle to the top left of the plan. This area shows the main access to the site from the B9099 via Scarth Road. Next slide, please. This slide shows a zoomed-in version of the proposed access as shown on the approved master plan. The proposed access will involve the reconfiguration of the existing road. I will now show the committee some photographs of the existing road junction in this location. Next slide, please. Thank you. This first photograph shows the existing junction of Scarth Road and the B9099. The proposed development site is beyond the small stretch of trees on the right-hand side of Scarth Road. Next photograph, please. This next image is taken on Scarth Road itself from the junction with Westfield. The development site is the area to the left of Scarth Road in this image. Next image, please. This final photograph is again taken from the junction with Westfield, this time looking round to the left a bit more. This area is approximately where the new junction will be located. Next slide, please. Thank you, Convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the location plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Panton. We do have deputations on this. I'll hand over to my Vice Convener to introduce them. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have Mr. George Black? And as Mr. Black comes to the podium, could you have 10 minutes for your deputation? We have got a lot of deputations today, so I will give you a prompt at 9 minutes to allow you a minute to sum up. Whenever you are ready, I shall start the timer.
Right.
Good morning, everyone. I am Chairman of the Lunkery Regorton and Menidi Community Council, and my input is as follows. The desire to remove the condition or modify the condition, thereby lifting the restriction on the number of houses to be built before suitable access road is constructed, is based upon the idea that based upon the idea that 250 houses, or as I'm now hearing that it's 300 houses, is a cul-de-sac, which can be up to 520 houses in a cul-de-sac. That's 250 or 300 is just about a third of the total number of houses in the entire village of Lunkerty at present. I don't think that's a cul-de-sac, even at present. Current access to that area is via Scarth Road, and I note there's mention that there's going to be a new road formed off Scarth Road. But currently, Scarth Road is a narrow street off the bend, as you saw in the photographs, with no footpath and houses, no footpath on either side, and houses with concealed driveways along its entirety. It terminates at a 90-degree blind corner, where it becomes Fairview, which is also a narrow road with a row of cottages along one side and larger houses on the other. There are often residents' cars parked along that road in its length, and there are several children living along that stretch. Many households there also have pets, including cats and dogs, the former of which will often be found wandering the roadway. At the end of Fairview, it turns 90 degrees again and continues down Tayview Road, which is a private road giving access to a number of large private dwellings. It's not a through road. The only available access at present, until that road might be built, is a continuation of Fairview, which is an old farm road to Denmarkfield Farm, which is now being developed as a rewilding area. There and allotments as well in that particular area. That's coming. There are less than 10 houses down that road whose occupiers currently use that for access. Being a private road, it's also part of the core path network, and as such, it's very popular with pedestrians, dog walkers and cyclists. It's only around 8 foot wide and not suitable for two-way traffic unless a maximum of 2 vehicles use a passing place approximately halfway down. In any event, it is, or at least was, a gated road, but that gate was vandalised in January last year and hasn't been replaced. Effectively, that road's gated at either end. In 2018 or 19, the Community Council had a presentation on this proposed development delivered by members of the Perth and Kinross Council Roads Department, at which time we were shown a graph depicting the proposed traffic flows, traffic modelling diagram. It showed traffic as being allowed to flow along what is currently a closed-off area at the southern end of Marshall Way, across Tayview Road, the private road, and into the field where the outline permission has been granted for this development. This was challenged by a member who was watching the presentation as never having been in the plans that would be a potential access, and assurances were given at this time that this road would not be opened up and that the graph or the graphic model was only an example. It has to be noted that even a number as low as 250 houses could, on average, mean up to 500 extra vehicles using that access possibly 4 times a day, whatever access that may be. Meaning at least an extra 2,000 vehicle movements daily with all them converging at the north end of Marshall Way, where it meets the B9099, the main road. This really shouldn't or cannot happen. If it is the plan to refer to 250, or as we now hear, 300 houses as a cul-de-sac, it has therefore to be taken that this is currently the only road in and out of the village. Scarth Road obviously too, but that's accessed as described off Westfield and Marshall Way. So effectively, one exit and entrance with a subsidiary. Then the whole village in that respect is in effect a cul-de-sac, but 864 houses, as I believe Lunkerty has, plus an extra 250, makes it a rather large cul-de-sac, which is more than the 520, which allegedly would be is the biggest cul-de-sac area apparently, as I'm now hearing. Without going into full detail about road accidents, it has to be remembered that one fatality costs around £2 million. In the event of such an incident on Marshall Way, for example, even at present, that road would be closed to allow a full investigation. That would have an obvious knock-on effect on current traffic levels without adding to that risk. To that end, Marshall Way shouldn't be opened up at its southern end, if that is considered, nor should Scarth Road and a wide footpath or private road be used as general access to a new development. And a new road should be constructed further down, proper access, before development gets going with any gusto. Perhaps this could be factored into a request I have previously submitted to the Scottish Government to install a pedestrian footbridge between Luncarty and Redgorton across the A9, where the existing at-grade crossing is being upgraded, despite a Transport Scotland assertion that no at-grade crossings would be installed on the dual A9. This bridge would also have a bearing on the Luncarty South development, allowing pedestrian access, etc. The response I have currently from Scottish Government is that because neither developer, Luncarty South or Bertha Park, requested one, then it's not to be constructed. Maybe now it should be. Its cost would be possibly around or below £2 million. As far as I'm aware, developer contribution for 250 houses is around £1.5 million. And there's another 400 on top of that to come. On behalf of the Luncarty and surrounding community, I would request, therefore, that this condition be retained as is and a proper access built earlier than is currently being considered. Fine, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Are you willing to accept questions? Members, do you have any questions for Mr. Black? There appears to be no questions. Mr. Black, you're free to go. Could I call on Mr. Stephen? Morning, Mr. Stephen. Same procedure, 10 minutes. I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes. If you'd like to proceed.
Good morning. My name is John Stephen. I'm the Managing Director of A&J Stephen Limited. I would like to start by thanking the convener for giving me the opportunity to address you. As was mentioned earlier, this site was granted planning permission in principle in August 2019. The information we submitted with that application included a transport assessment that concluded up to 630 houses plus 5 hectares of employment land, or 650 houses, as was mentioned previously, could be accommodated through the proposed new access onto the main street before the junction reached capacity. Despite the evidence in that transport assessment, a condition limiting the number of houses to 300 until further work was undertaken was imposed on the consent. It is that condition we are seeking to adjust with this Section 42 application. Before going on, I thought it might be useful for you to understand why we are seeking to adjust this condition. In order to progress any development, public utilities to serve the development must be designed, installed and commissioned. Development of this site has not yet commenced because Planning Condition 3, as it is currently worded, does not provide the certainty we require to make the substantial investments in services such as electricity grid reinforcements, foul sewers, pumping stations and surface water sewers. At the moment, we have no certainty over the number of houses these public utilities need to cater for, and therefore we cannot procure them. The change we have been seeking to Condition 3 was to amend the level at which further work be required from 300 houses to 630 houses. 630 being the number supported by the transport assessment which accompanied the original in-principle application. In order to support this request, we commissioned a new transport review and accompanying survey to consider the junction in light of the changed circumstances brought about by the dualling of the A9 past Luncarty and the associated grade-separated junction serving Stanley. This is important in that the lower the traffic flow through the main street in Luncarty, the greater the capacity of the junction used to access this development. This new survey data showed that the traffic on the main street through Luncarty was approximately 30% lower in the morning and evening peaks when compared to previous assessment. What the survey could not determine, however, was the reason for this change. Was this due to traffic going to and from Stanley and beyond, bypassing Luncarty altogether and using the new grade-separated junction, or was it due to post-COVID working patterns changing? For the purposes of your decision today, however, this question is not directly relevant, as your transportation colleagues have decided that too little time has elapsed since the pandemic to determine if this reduction in traffic flow is as a result of the new post-COVID working patterns, or is as a result of a redistribution of traffic flows bypassing Lunkerty via the A9. The recommendation the transportation team have made in the committee report is based on the assumption that there is no reduction in flows through Lunkerty. Accordingly, they have concluded that they cannot accept our position that junction has capacity for 630 houses. Their position is that the junction can accommodate 520 houses and are recommending, along with the planning department, that the condition be adjusted to reflect this revised figure. So, why, might you ask, has the council changed its view between the consideration of this application and the original in principle application? The principal reason relates to the transportation policies in place at the time the previous local plan was adopted. It was that old development plan that was current at the time the in principle application was approved. The government reporter appointed to examine the LDP made it clear that the reason for the 300 house limit related to the then current PKC Roads Development Guide. That document has since been superseded by the National Roads Development Guide and the National Planning Policy document Designing Streets. No such limits exist in these new policy documents. It's also important to note that the assertion made by the Community Council that this is a cul-de-sac is not correct. The definition of a cul-de-sac is a street with only one point of entry and exit. That's not the case here. The Community Council also suggested that a new junction is required. Proper access, I think was the phrase Mr. Black used, proper access should be constructed. Proper access is being constructed. The photographs that were shown at the beginning were slightly misleading in that they showed the existing road at its junction with Main Street. There is a new junction to be constructed there to the west of that location on the photograph, so that the traffic entering the development will not use Scarf Road. They will entirely on a new road. However, it's possible that in an emergency situation Scarf Road could be used. Hence, it's not a cul-de-sac. One further minor point, and it is a minor point before I finish, I note one of the objectors has suggested that we do not own the land required to link the development into Ordie Road. This is not true. We built Ordie Road and the houses it serves in the 1970s and retained ownership of the land necessary to make this connection. Thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Councillor James, you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Convener. Thanks for the deputation, Stevenson. But I have a couple of questions, actually. Firstly, you say that there's not just this single access, which I have an issue with anyway. You say that the photographs didn't actually show the location properly. I also am aware that right next to where this junction is, there's also the bridge which crosses the A9 and also a railway line. So there's no, it's in a real awkward position on a bend. But I'm interested where the other access point is, apart from this one, which is being created, please.
I just wonder if it might be helpful if Mr. Panton could put the master plan back up again. I would reiterate what I mentioned in my presentation. The main access is on a new road. There is a secondary point of access should it be required in emergency situations. And if I can get the plan up in a moment, be able to show that to you. So Scarf Road will be rediverted onto the new development road, and it will be the new development road that will join with Main Street.
Okay, but it still comes out to that single point of entry.
Yes, but
right adjacent to the railway bridge.
yes, but if you come back down Scarth Road a few metres, there's a road that goes due north past the public open space.
Okay.
So if that last, I'll say 50 metres, I don't know what the distance is, 30 metres of road were ever blocked, the one just before the junction onto Main Street, you can still exit and enter the development via another street, via Scarth Road and the road that runs parallel with Main Street. Mr. Planton, could you put the other slide on, the close-up of the next slide? Yeah, there. You can see the dashed blue line with the arrowhead on it is the existing route of Scarth Road.
Yeah.
That final 50, 60 metres will be closed off and rediverted onto the pink Y branch, if you like, the right-hand branch of that Y onto the new development road.
Yeah, I totally get that, but it's still a single point of entry onto the B 8099 or 9099, sorry. A single point of entry out adjacent to the bridge. I don't want to labour on it.
Well, can I just maybe labour the point? If you come back to the point of that Y branch, the right-hand Y branch, if you look to the right of that, there's a street heads north. That's the second street. So if that final, I want to point at this, but the final 50, 60 metres were ever blocked for whatever reason, there is an alternative route.
Okay, I take your point, and perhaps we're clutching at straws here, but what I'm saying, okay, so south of the Y junction as it is on the screen at the moment is a single point of entry into the 650 houses, what you're asking for, or 520 houses, what you're asking for. That from the junction of the Y, if you like, that's a single point of entry. There is no other road into the site which would service the 520 or 650, whatever you want to call it, or three houses.
Two points there. South of that point, if there was ever a blockage south of that point, you could, in an emergency situation, use Scarth Road. And the second point is, Perth and Kinross Council are signatories to the Scots Roads Development Guide. There is no limit on a cul-de-sac. This isn't a cul-de-sac in any event. What was a cul-de-sac that the Perth and Kinross Council approved was the initial phase at Bertha Park, which included, from memory, I may get this wrong, I think it was 700 plus houses, plus a secondary school on what was effectively a cul-de-sac. Now, you may argue that that road was a different category of road to this. That's correct. But this is about the technical standards of the road that's to be constructed. Both the Council's transportation team and our independent consultants have confirmed that the junction has the capacity to accommodate 520 units. So there's no technical reason why that arrangement cannot be accepted.
Okay, I won't labour that anymore. The other point you actually made was that you're not able to plan because there's uncertainty with access to the site to be able to get in your infrastructure. Well, surely the certainty is already there if you were to build the access, which is the requirement in the conditions. So if you built that access, perhaps at an earlier stage, then you're giving yourself the reason for doing it.
We cannot commence construction on a development until we know how many houses we can construct, because to say it's a convoluted process to bring the services in is an understatement. It's a very long, arduous process. And I don't mean actually physically doing the work, I mean getting to the point where you can put a JCB on the site. So we need that certainty.
I get that, but and again, I'm trying to labour a point. The certainty's there. Yes, you can have your 520, 600 houses, whatever it is, but we're saying at 300, plus the 5 hectares of employment, at that point, there needs to be another access before you continue. So surely the onus is on you to build that access. You then got unlimited access to the whole site.
But the point is, there's no technical reason why the 300 house constraint exists, none whatsoever. So if the decision of the committee today is not to accept that, we would go to appeal and go for the 650. Today you'd be given the chance to accept 520. There's no technical reason for this limit. It could be argued there may have been, and I don't agree with that view, that there may have been at the PPIP stage because of the old LDP. That and the policies associated with that, they no longer apply.
Okay, fine, thanks. Convener, can I have one final question, please? Sorry.
I'll come back to Councillor James, and I'll take the next question from Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Thank you, Mr. Stephen. I think Councillor James has sort of hinted on both my questions, but just to clarify, the access that we saw, the Y-shaped access, if I can call it that, would that be built before the first house occupied? I mean, obviously you'll have to have access to the site, but that remodelling of the junction, will that take place before the first house is occupied?
Apologies. Yes, your transportation colleagues would not countenance any other solution.
And my second question, I think, again, Councillor James alluded to it, but from what you were saying at the beginning, you need to have the knowledge of definitive knowledge of houses to be built before you can put the infrastructure in place. You can't build that first on an assumption, I presume, that's because of the cost, I presume. Is that right?
Well, there's two aspects. One, what size do we make the sewers to go through development? How much grid reinforcement and the electricity grid is required? We don't know the answer to these questions at the moment. So that is why the development has not proceeded. It was granted consent, I think it was 2019. It's not proceeded because we need the certainty.
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen. There's clear concerns from the community here, rightly so, about safety, road junction. And this other route that you're saying is accessible along Westfield, I think it is. That is a route that generally has lots of parked cars along it, and is not, you know, there'd be a stop and start to increase traffic flow on that road as well, as you're saying that you can access the site from the north. You know, I'm hearing your concerns about from your business angle, but there are extreme safety concerns. So the community are looking for a lot of comfort here, and I'm not sure you're quite giving us it. So could you maybe expand even further on this Scarth Road section? Because there is no pavement, there's nothing, there's a children's play park on the other side of that. So can you answer a bit clearer on all of that?
Yes. The secondary points of access you've queried are that they are secondary points of access. They will not be used on a normal basis by the residents of the new development. They will use the fastest, most direct route, which will be the new junction. All we're talking about here is, in an emergency situation, if for some reason that road happens to be blocked, there is an alternative route. They would not be used in a normal course of events. The other point, in terms of comfort, in terms of health and the safety of the road users, the transportation team of the council and our independent appointed professional transportation consultant have concluded there are no issues with the new road in terms of safety. So technically, and by technically I mean that does consider road safety issues as well, there are no reasons for the 300 house limit.
Councillor James.
Thanks very much again, Convener. And going back, Mr. Stevens, sorry, the traffic survey, you say, you know, it's come up with a low count, lower than before. I actually use this road on a daily basis, both morning and evening. And I know from personal experience that this road is getting busier, and actually a lot of people have started using the road through Lunkerty and on further on to Stanley as well, because they feel that parts of the A9 are still unsafe. So would you agree that a higher traffic flow would actually have an impact on this junction, which goes on to the B9099?
Yes, clearly it would. However, there's so much spare capacity in the junction design, that's not an issue. The traffic survey done, we did a traffic survey, the council did their own independent traffic survey, and they both came to the same conclusion. The council's figures verified our own. The council's conclusion was different from our own. They did not want to assume that the reduction in flow was as a result of a post-COVID, did not want to assume it was a result of the A9 dual line or COVID. So they've not taken that reduction in flow into account in arriving at the 520 figure. If you took that reduction in flow into account, the capacity would be substantially higher. But they're not accepting that position. They're taking a precautionary approach.
Okay, can I ask when the survey was actually carried out? Was it during COVID, or has it been recently, please?
It was done post-COVID. I can't remember the exact date, but it was agreed with the council. But if I'm going to guess, I'm going to say the spring of last year. It was a date selected to be deemed to be a normal day, if you like. It wasn't a school holiday or a weekend. I can check. I've got my laptop there. I could check if it's important.
Thank you.
Want me to check? No.
No, that's fine. It was last year. You know, what I was looking for was it more recent? You know, if it was spring last year, I mean, it's still quite a way away. Okay, thank you.
The application was submitted in early summer last year, so we can't do the survey after we submitted the application.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Vice Convener. And thanks for taking questions here. You've mentioned on a few times that you need some clarity in relation to putting the infrastructure and that in place. Can I just ask you to expand on what the type of clarity that you require before you can commit to infrastructure upgrades?
For example, the surface water for the development will discharge to the watercourse to the south, quite a distance south of the development. What size of pipe do we put in to convey the surface water to that point? What size of suds pond do we put in? What size of substations do we put in? There will inevitably be grid reinforcement, electricity grid reinforcement for this development because of the switch to non-gas heating. There'll be lots of air source heat pumps on this development. But is it 300 or is it 600? So there are significant upgrades required. So the challenges we face here in trying to size infrastructure is no different. That's the same across any development site. So it's not unique to this site.
Is this just basically based on the numbers of houses you can build on the infrastructure over that, or is it changes in legislation that are due to come forward?
It's related to the number of units. There will be changes in legislation, yes. But we're aware of what they are. It's the number of units. Is it 300? Is it 600? Is it 760 as suggested in the LDP? We don't know.
Sorry, Vice Convener, just is that not within your gift then to put forward a full application to attain the exact numbers that you would like to you envisage building, rather than in principle, which will always leave it a bit, you know, in principle?
I wish it was in my gift, but it's actually in your gift, not mine. I don't know what I'm going to get, even in the future.
Excuse me, I thought, you know, we can only determine what applications are before us, and we can't have an in principle rather than a full application which would confirm the exact numbers on the houses. Might be something I'll come back to officers with. Thank you.
Sorry, just to clarify, when I say it's in your gift, not mine, at the point we make the detailed application, it would be in your gift to determine what's appropriate. Sorry for the confusion.
Councillor Massey.
Thank you for your deputation, Mr. Stephen. It's just really a point of clarity. I think you said earlier on that you're content with what the recommendation within this report of 520 houses. Can I just clarify, is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen, there doesn't appear to be any further questions. You're free to go. I'll hand you back to the convener.
Thank you. Can I ask, do members have any questions for officers? Councillor James.
There's a surprise. My question to Mr. Panton, yes, this is an IPM rather than a full planning application. If Mr. Stephen came back with an application for 520 or 650 houses, could we condition on full planning that an access road or an infrastructure has to be in place at the same point on this? You know, so in effect, we're saying, OK, you can have 600, but at the 300 point, you have to build another access road.
Thank you, Councillor James. So just to confirm, when an applicant is to submit a detailed application, the conditions that are attached to the in-principle application will be relevant. So in this instance, Stephen Holmes would need this condition to be amended in order for us to have a positive recommendation on our major new scheme. So it is within Stephen Holmes' interest that they need this condition amended in order for them to progress with a detailed application. So I do get what you're saying, that it would make sense just to submit a major scheme with 700 houses, but they cannot do that because that would then be in breach of a condition that's on there in principle. So they really do need to get this condition amended in order to come forward with a bigger scheme, and that's why we're here today. I'd also just like to point out as well that the way condition 3 is worded is not to construct this junction. It is just that a scheme needs to be submitted to us and agreed. So I would draw your attention carefully to the wording of what we're recommending of condition 3. This is not about the construction of the junction. This is just about when further solutions are required. So that's an important note for this consideration. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm just still confused. So sure. Thank you.
Mr. Smith wants to add a bit to this.
Yeah, maybe just clarify. In effect, the adjustments that are being made to this in principle application are to allow Stephen Holmes to come forward with the type of applications that they want to progress with, and the adjustment of numbers is required in order to do that. So that's maybe a simpler way of saying it. It is, however, also an alternative that a separate standalone detailed application could be submitted to deal with that as well, but that would require a lot more information than we have before us today. So this is an expedited way of moving forward in the direction of travel that Stephen Holmes are taking.
Thank you. Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Karina. It's probably a question for Mr. Salmon. I think he's hanging around in the background there. There's been some points raised about access onto the B, what 9099 is it? I can't remember. Because of the flow of traffic, will some form of controlled junction be advisable when we get to a full application?
Dean.
Good morning, committee. At this time, the assessment that we have carried out to establish the number 520 is assuming a priority junction. However, there is a condition within the original IPM of 2017 that requires that the full length of Scarth Road, that a scheme be brought forward to basically for improvements along there in terms of any additional traffic So you may be looking at traffic calming. There may be requirements for additional pedestrian facilities, etc. However, at this time, nothing has been proposed in terms of a signalisation or any other type of junction arrangement. However, that will be very much up to the applicant when they come forward with a detailed application.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Just in relation to NPF4, which we know is now live and legal, and the infrastructure first, I think policy 18 within that. How does this that we're actually pushing back, or this application pushes back the potential of improved infrastructure fit with the NPF4? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Because in this instance we have transport surveys both done by the applicant and the council that say that this junction is sufficient for this level of capacity, because we have that survey work done by the professionals and agreed, then it complies with NPF4, the infrastructure requirements, because we can demonstrate that the infrastructure that would be in place would be suitable for that 520 number. So NPF4 has been taken into consideration, and because that survey work is there that justifies this, then it complies with that. Hopefully that answers your question.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, my question is, was there a previous traffic survey done with the original application? And if so, what number of houses did that say had to be built first? I'm slightly concerned that traffic is building up steadily following COVID, and I'm just concerned that we're rushing this.
Yes, there was a survey with the previous application, but again, it's more complicated perhaps than you're making out. There was a different development plan in place at the time that had limitations on it. So there are multiple factors that went into that original approval, but maybe Mr. Salmon can give you some more detail if that's necessary. Although remembering we're looking at the application that's before us today, not looking back at previous decisions, although they are material factors, but we have the information that we're needing to consider today. Mr. Salmon, do you have anything to add to that?
Happy to perhaps add some clarification. In the establishment of the figure 520, that is using pre-COVID traffic flows. We have assumed that essentially there will be a return to full normal. So what we did there was use traffic flows from 2016, used standard what we call trip growth rates, which were applied up to the year 2033. We then applied development trip generation, and upon reaching the number 520, that is essentially the threshold for acceptable performance of the new junction.
Thank you. I see there are no more questions. I will like to put forward a motion to grant the application subject to the conditions contained in the briefing notes. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Illingworth, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Convener. I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Do we have an amendment? Councillor James, you want clarification?
Yeah, please, Convener. This is for an in principle, am I right? And therefore we still have opportunity if a full planning application was put in to be able to discuss this further.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
As there is no amendment, the application is granted subject to the conditions contained in the briefing notes. Thank you. Right, we move swiftly on to the next application, a major application. It is for the erection of 81 dwelling houses, a substation and the formation of a play area, SUDS, landscaping and associated works, approval of matters specified in conditions of 17.00088 IPM LDB site H31, and this is at 90 metres west of King Street Junction, Millbrae, Stanley. And introducing the report is Mr. Panton. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. So firstly, I would draw members' attention to the circulated amendment highlighting the removal of condition 3 from the report. Following publication of the report, SEPA no longer require condition 3 to be in place, hence its removal. So moving on to the item itself, the second item today, as stated, is for the erection of 81 dwelling houses and associated works on LDP allocated site H30 at Millbrae, Stanley. The site forms part of a wider master plan for residential development across Stanley, comprising of 5 site allocations forming LDP sites H30 to H34. A planning permission in principle was granted as one application across all of these allocations in 2018. The site therefore benefits from both planning permission in principle and an LDP site allocation. There is also an extant detailed planning permission for 34 dwellings on the site. It should be noted that only one letter of representation was received regarding the proposal, and the application is only before you today as it constitutes a major development. Next slide, please. This plan shows the location of the site under question. The site is to the southeast corner of Stanley and to the northwest of Stanley Mill. The site covers an area of approximately 4.7 hectares and is contained to the south, east and west by existing woodland. There is existing housing to the north which overlooks the site. Next slide, please. Here we have an existing site plan. As seen, the site is an agricultural field which has a slight slope from north down to south. You can also clearly see the extent of the aforementioned woodland. Next slide, please. This is the proposed site plan. You can see the general arrangement proposed and the relationship of the development to the nearby environments. There will be a singular vehicular access from Millbrae and a number of pedestrian links to the nearby path network. The proposed play area is the purple circle to the right of the site. A SUDS basin is the area located to the left of the play park and slightly further down. Next slide, please. This plan shows the proposed section of the site. Here you can see how the applicant, which in this case is Ogilvy Homes, is proposing to develop this sloping site. As seen, some small retaining walls are proposed to ensure garden grounds are relatively flat. The retaining walls are, however, minor and do not raise any adverse concerns. Next slide, please. This plan shows the housing mix. It is noted that the housing mix does not fully comply with Policy 25. However, the mix is still considered to be acceptable for this location. The proposal is therefore considered a minor departure from the development plan for this reason only. The yellow plots are 2-bedroomed homes, the orange are 3-bedroomed homes, the blue are 4-bedroomed homes, and the grey are the affordable housing plots. Next slide, please. This plan shows a standard elevation and floor plan for one of the house types. All of the house types have a consistent palette of materials and are considered to be appropriate for this setting. Next slide, please. This plan shows the detailing of the proposed play park. You can see that the park has a variety of equipment which caters for many ages. Next slide, please. We now move on to photographs of the existing site. This first image shows where the site access will be obtained from on Millbrae near the junction with King Street. Next image, please. This image shows the path network which is already in place to the rear of the properties on Shield Hill Place. The site under question is the field which you can just make out to the right of the photograph. It is proposed to have pedestrian links from the development to this path network. Next image, please. This photograph shows the same footpath as previous, however slightly further up. You can now get a better view of the development site to the right where the cows are located. Next image, please. This photo now shows the rear of the properties on Shield Hill Place. The properties in this photograph will be the closest ones to the proposed development. Next image, please. This image shows the footpath link which extends beyond the site. This path will be retained and connected into from the development at the approximate location of where the photograph was taken. Next image, please. Here, we are now looking back on the development site. To give you your bearings, Millbrae is beyond the trees to the end of the field and Shield Hill Place is to the right. Next image, please. This penultimate photograph shows the site boundary to the east. You can see the established vegetation here. Next image, please. And this final image shows the site when viewed from the path at the rear of Shield Hill Place. You can make out the woodland to the south, which is to be retained and will contain the development. Next slide, please. Thank you, Convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the proposed site plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Panton. Do members have any questions for officers? Councillor James.
Thanks, Convener. Willie Wilson will be very proud of me. 81 houses is an awful lot of squeezing. Do you not think this is over development here? And the other bit to that is what will happen if we don't require the SUDs? What will happen with that land there? And where is the substation located on that map, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. So with regards to your first point for overdevelopment, all of the housing plots meet what we require under our local development plan. I would add that the original scheme that was submitted we weren't quite content with, so Ogilvy Homes did make some amendments to make some plots slightly better, and that in effect has had a knock-on on the housing mix, which I mentioned in the presentation. So we are content now with these amendments that all plots have sufficient ground, and also there remains to be sufficient open space, so we don't consider this to be overdevelopment for this allocated site. Your second point about not requiring the SUDs, just to confirm, the SUDs are still required. Condition 3 was just about an additional survey that needed to be undertaken, which SEPA no longer require, so the SUDs will still be in place. And your final point about the substation, if you wouldn't mind, Audrey, please putting up the proposed site plan again, and I can point this out for you. So the substation is just as you come into the site from Millbrae, you can just see a small square-like shape there. That's where the substation is to be located. So hopefully that clarifies all of your points, Councillor James.
Yeah, it does. Sorry. Thanks.
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question. I'm noting that there's been no consultation or comment from Tayside Health with regard to GP services. And is that something that we can get an answer on?
Yes, thank you, Bailey. Again, this is an allocated site and consultations were undertaken in relation to the preparation of the local development plan and no requirements made in relation to that site.
Thank you. Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Convener. Just a very quick question. On paragraph 79, we talk about electric charging points, electric vehicle charging points. Presumably they're going to be just for visitors, up to the house owners to fit their own, presumably. In visitor parking spaces, I presume they'll be. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Braun. Yes, confirm they'll be available for use by anybody who's visiting the development, residents or visitors.
Thank you. Councillor James, you have a second question?
Yes, I do, please, convener. I'm looking at the LDP. I mean, Stanley is growing like you wouldn't believe. I mean, the 5 sites around Stanley, in fact, the one on the B9099 is currently being developed. The access point was a bone of contention in the first place, and it's like driving up the Khyber Pass at the minute, whereas the road's been destroyed. I wouldn't want to see the same at the entrance to this very narrow road down Mill Street, which is access to the mill down at the bottom, a lot of housing. Are there measures in place for this access to be made good at an early point? I wouldn't like to see so much damage as there is on the B9099.
Thank you, Councillor James. Yes, I would draw your attention to condition 19, which requires a construction traffic management scheme, which has to be submitted and agreed with the council as roads authority. So we wouldn't want to get into a situation where the roads are in bad nick around the development, and this condition will help to prevent that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bailey McLaren. Oh, sorry, do apologise. Councillor Cuthbert first. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, my question is, I've looked at the local development plan. I couldn't actually work out exactly what that area was zoned for, because you mentioned that the inquiries with NHS and so on was done on the basis of the local plan and its preparation. So what was this actual site zoned for in terms of numbers?
So this site is actually slightly complicated because Stanley has a number of housing developments. It was covered from H31 to H34. So the 5 sites cover a total of 248 to 387 residential units. So because we got the in-principle consent granted, which covered all 5 of them, this proposal is in accordance with that in principle that was granted, which, like I say, ranges from 248 to 387 residential units.
Could I do a supplementary on that?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Yeah. So in terms of, you say there's applications for all 5 sites come in. So what's the number that's been put in for the total of the 5, and how does that compare to what's in the LDP? I mean, I'm principally concerned about the services. We've got situations in Kinross where a far greater number has been allowed to be added just because of planning, and that's putting real pressure on our services. I'm just wondering what that number was.
I think just clarifying there again, and if you look at the pages within the local development plan, it's identified as H31, as Mr. Panton said as well. There's a cumulative number that's indicative of the capacity of the work undertaken at the time of the preparation of the local development plan. The detail of proposals coming forward will then see consultation undertaken with the various service providers, including Scottish Water, etc., and the numbers will be confirmed in relation to all sorts of other policies related to the local development plan and NPF4. And in this case, the numbers are considered to be acceptable and able to be accommodated, both in terms of the services, and you'll see the consultations that were undertaken with the various service providers. So there is no specific number that says you can only build X number here. There's an indicative number in the development plan across a number of sites, and then the detailed number associated to what is appropriate in relation to each individual site is assessed at the point of the detailed application, which has been done here, and we're accepting of that, as are the consultees.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Christian. My issue is if we've got, I don't know, 800 houses given consent and the local plan was based on up to 387, for example, we should then presumably go back to NHS, because I don't see any consultation in this application with the NHS, for example.
The scenarios that you set out are not the case here. So the total numbers are not 800. Yeah, and the numbers in relation to this site don't take it above the threshold within the local development plan of which the consultations were undertaken.
The question I asked originally was how many have actually been consented, because you said that all 5 sites had applications and the numbers were known, And how does that compare? I haven't had an answer to that number, so hence following it up.
In terms of the total number, we'll have to come back to you on that. So again, it's whether you feel that you need to defer the application to wait on that number, because we'll have to go back and look at the various applications. If you'd come to us in advance of the committee today, we could have had that information for you, but we don't have it at hand at the moment.
I would move for deferral then.
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Question about the foul drainage. What does a separate consenting process mean in real terms?
The applications would require to be made to Scottish Water, who are the authority that allow for connections to the public network, not Perth and Kinross Council.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Sorry, just going back to Councillor Cuthbert's point, I draw your attention to paragraph 4 of the report, which says at the time of writing the report, allocations H32 and H34 are yet to submit detailed applications. So because they've not submitted those detailed applications yet, we can't give you an infinitive number. We can only draw your attention to the indicative number, which I previously mentioned. And so far, this scheme would not take us over that threshold. So it would now be for the remainder of H32 and H34 to make sure that they don't go over that threshold. So hopefully that's sufficient for you.
I don't think so, because H31 on the plan appears to be the smallest of the sites, and we're looking at 81 houses there, so you multiply that by 5, you're getting up above the numbers in here.
Yes, but what you were asking was for a deferral to get those numbers. We can't give you those numbers because there is no application granted on H32 and H34. So if we were to do a deferral, we couldn't really tell you anything over and above that.
I think all we can tell you is that the numbers don't exceed the allocation within the development plan in terms of what has been consented in detail.
I was actually going to move a deferral for NHS to be consulted.
Again, maybe just clarify, there's no locus for us to consult with NHS Tayside yet. That would only kick in once we were at a point where it was proposed in detailed applications to exceed the allocation, which we're not at. So the chances are that, and again, it's the Health and Social Care Partnership perhaps as well, rather than just NHS Tayside, but they would likely say we have not raised any objection to the numbers set out in the local development plan. If those numbers have to be exceeded, then consult with us, but we're not at that stage yet.
Very well, I'll withdraw the move for deferral.
Thank you. I see there are no more questions. Yeah. Can I ask for a motion? Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Gabriela. Yes, I just a motion to move the paper as is.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Oh, Councillor Waters.
I'm happy to second it, and just a brief comment on the affordable housing element. It is nice to see them spread across a number of streets and not just in one corner of the site. So more than happy to second the motion.
Do we have an amendment? No amendment. Can I ask if any comments on the report? No comments. And the application is granted subject to the conditions contained in the briefing notes. Thank you. I'm going to ask if the committee wants to have a 10-minute comfort break before the next application. Yeah. 10 minutes. We'll come back here at 10:53. Thank you. Right, we can move on. We're moving on to the third item, I believe, which is the formation of a 49.9 megawatt solar farm comprising ground-mounted solar arrays, inverters, transformers, a substation, security fencing, CCTV cameras, cabling, access tracks and associated works on land 130 metres southeast of Cooper Angus substation, Pleasance Road, Cooper Angus. And to introduce the report is Mr. Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. And I hope that everyone can hear me. I've got the microphone as close to my mouth as I can today. As said, this application proposes a solar farm of a scale which sits within the major category of development, but only 0.1 megawatt below the threshold of a national scale development. I'll now take you through a series of slides to give you some detail and context to the proposal. First slide, please. Thank you. This first image shows an area view outlining in red the extent of the site, its location related to Cooper Angus to the north and A94 to the west, as well as the A923 to the east. The white square area adjoining the northeast boundary is the existing substation. Otherwise, although not shown on this image, a battery storage facility is being developed to the east of the substation. Next slide, please. This plan shows the proposed layout of solar panels and other elements of the development. Next slide, please. Next, we see a typical panel elevation showing the height of just over 3 metres and separation between panels of just under 4 metres. Next slide. Then see an image of one of the storage containers. These are 2.6 metres tall and just over 12 metres long. Next slide. This last plan shows the inverter transformer container, which is the same height but half the length. And we now move to a series of photographs which show the situation recently. This first photo looks east from Lower Pleasance Road towards the existing substation, which you can see in the yellow colour to left centre of the picture. And the pylons are leading there too. The land in the foreground, which is ploughed, sits at a higher level and then drops. The proposed solar farm would largely be to the left of the pylons on the unploughed area in the distance. Next photo, please. Here we see a view from further south and looking northeast towards the substation in the middle left of shot and the battery storage facility to the right, which you can see as black boxes. Next photo, please. This third photo shows a view looking north from the site towards Cooper Angus. Next and final photo. Here we have a view from Balshergo Farm looking west across the site to the A94 and mains of Keithwick. Thank you, Convener. That now concludes the presentation and we return to the site layout. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We do have deputations on this item. I will now hand over to my deputy convener to invite the deputations to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have Mr. Steve Galloway? Mr. Galloway, you've got 10 minutes to have your deputation. I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes to sum up. Whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
Thank you, everyone. I'm pleased that the report of handling highlights a number of significant failings in this proposal. I want, however, to make the committee aware, for the record, of factual inaccuracies in the application with regard to the reasons given by the applicant for the need to select this specific location in proximity to the substation. The report of handling states, paragraph 77, that because the applicant says that a grid connection to the substation is of critical importance to the development viability, use and occupation of prime land alone is not considered to be a reason for refusal. The report says in paragraph 76 regarding this particular site, in terms of the justification of the proposal in relation to prime agricultural land, it is considered that the development has been sequentially justified on the basis that 1, a site required to be sited, site is required to be sited within the 3 kilometres of the existing substation, and 2, that other sites have not been identified as more favourable for various reasons. So both of these assertions we believe are misleading. Firstly, the development has not been sequentially justified as needing to be within 3 kilometres from an existing substation. There is no technical evidence or justification presented or given in the application for the maximum 3 kilometre substation connection. The Calais solar proposal, which is currently in the PKC planning process, is not within this distance. It's almost 6 kilometres from the nearest substation. That developer has stated that it simply needs to connect into the distribution network, not into a substation. And there are other solar developments in the UK which are not close to substations. So this assertion is simply a financial preference based on what this developer is prepared to spend on this development on the only land he happens to have access to. It is not a technical requirement for solar development at all. The applicant will try to convince you that it is, and it's not. Secondly, it is also not true that all other sites have been identified as being less favourable. The sequential report produced by the applicant has been prepared only to appear to have looked at alternatives, and evidence for this is that of the 3 alternative sites looked at, the third potential development area, PDA 3, paragraph 3.1.3 in the sequential test report, is exactly the same Keithwick site which the PKC planning officers specifically mentioned favourably in this report of handling and deem explicitly as vastly more suitable for this kind and scale of solar development than the Market Hill site. The developer, Mr. Merchandani, admits the site PDA 3 is poorer quality land, which he does not have the development access to, but dismisses it due to the need for screening, presence of archaeological remains, and impact on wildlife, when all of those issues are much more pronounced on the proposed Market Hill site. In fact, he concludes only that PDA 3 is no more suitable for large-scale PV solar development than the development site, i.e. not that it is less suitable. The fact that this alternative site, which Mr. Merchandani dismisses as unviable, is in fact now being proposed for solar development by another applicant, currently before the Scottish Government Energy Consensus Unit, shows it is not true that other sites, other than Market Hill, are not available or suitable for solar development, even within the 3 kilometres of the substation. Mr. Merchandani doesn't like this alternative site because A, the landowner is different and he has no access to it, and B, it would cost him more money. It's simply that this farmer and this developer that want it here. It means the report of handling should not state in paragraph 76 that the development has been sequentially justified for the 2 reasons that I've explained, and the application should be rejected on this basis as in addition to those that it's been recommended for rejection. We'd also like councillors to note a second point about the use of prime agricultural land, which is not mentioned in the report of handling. The report rightly points out the negative cumulative impact on agriculture from both this and the proposed Keithwick solar farm of 140 hectares. The applicant will tell you that the Market Hill land in the application is already being used for energy, i.e. biofuels. This is not correct, as much of it is being used for potatoes and other crops. We have photographs if you would like evidence, and in fact the photograph you put up on the screen a moment ago shows potato drills on the land in question. And I can quote Mr. Merchandani from the first public online consultation when he was asked who owns the land, and his exact words were, "The land is owned by local potato farmers. I said to them that I will pay you a little more than you get for your potatoes if you let me put up solar panels. It's prime potato land." And even if some of the land is being used for biofuels, if this land is turned into a solar farm, additional agricultural land currently being used for food production will in turn be lost to biofuel production, meaning that food production will be lost either way. And we'll have seen the news this morning of the fact that we are already suffering a shortage of vegetables in the UK. Finally, the report of handling states that the solar farm element will not result in the loss of prime agricultural land, rather the land use will change for a temporary period of 35 years. Firstly, 35 years in any normal person's world is not considered temporary. It's a lifetime. The effect on food production over 35 years exceeds a generation of change. Secondly, it does not address the non-solar elements, which includes the construction of a new substation and offices on the site, and which will be permanent. And can we really expect that panels will be removed after 35 years with all the infrastructure in place to replace or update them? It should be noted that the proposal only contains indicative details of these additional offices and substations. And as this is a detailed planning application, details of these structures should have been and should be provided. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Can members submit questions, please? Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Thank you for your deputation. We seem to be faced with a decision here. The land use for growing food, which we've mentioned we now need, or using it to produce energy, electricity energy, which we all want to flick the switch and the lights come on. And we all want to try and get away from fossil fuel. So I just trying to get your view on that. You know, it's a debatable point. Which one do we go for? Really, I mean, would you not agree that energy, or electric energy, is something we need? We know that future sources of energy, we've seen on TV, hydrogen fusion and whatever, it works now, but it's years, decades away from commercial use. So could I ask, is that is not electric generation that important?
Thank you. Yeah, I would completely agree with you. The point that we're making, and the point that I'm trying to make, is not a point about whether solar or renewables is a good idea. That's not the point at all. It's about the specific location of this development. And if others will probably say more about this. I was just choosing this particular area, but it's been rejected for a number of reasons, but principally because of the location, on the topography and the scale and the size and the impact and the visual amenity, which is all correct, and I didn't want to go over that ground again. What we're trying to say is that just because a landowner and a developer have access to a particular spot and have said particular things about the necessity to use that location, doesn't mean that that is the right place to build something like this. And our argument would be that it is, in addition to all of the points that have been made well in the report of handling, that this additional aspect, which is, we believe, is misleading, because there are other areas where you could build a solar farm of this scale, which would be much less impactful on the environment, much less impactful on the visual amenity. And we are concerned that facts or things that are presented as facts in the report might mislead those who read it into thinking that these in fact are the requirements for a location for a solar farm, if that answers your question.
Mr. Galloway, there's no further questions. You're free to go. Could I call on Mr. David Galloway? Mr. Galloway, I'll give you 10 minutes. I'll give you a prompt at 9 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. We are pleased that the report of handling highlights many significant failings in this solar proposal. Today, I would simply like to make the committee aware of 3 specific further areas where the report of handling considers the application to be in line with planning policy, but where we would strongly contest this. We would like the points raised here to be acknowledged, put on the record as contravening the relevant plans and policies, and added to the documented grounds for refusal, please. Firstly, residential amenity, paragraphs 57 to 61 of the report of handling. Firstly, glint and glare. The planning officer's conclusion in paragraph 58 that, quote, the potential for road safety concerns and direct impacts on nearby dwellings raises further concerns that the development is of a scale which is too large for its proposed setting, is absolutely correct. However, the applicant's own glint and glare report completely ignores glare possibilities on Pleasance Road. It is completely not considered, which would be surrounded on both sides by solar panels for a stretch of over 550 metres from Borgershow down to Cooper Angus. The south to north sloping nature of this road means that no amount of planting will ever be able to mitigate solar glare along this long section of Pleasance Road. Also, light from operational sources, paragraph 61 of the report of handling. The report of handling notes that with respect to the development, quote, it is not stated what external lighting is proposed, unquote. Without any lighting information, it cannot be right that the report of handling draws the conclusion that lighting impacts can be, quote, mitigated through appropriate placement. The applicant has provided zero detail of lighting required over a vast area of open countryside, as you saw in the photographs. The lighting over such a wide area should have been described in full detail, and the report of handling's assumption on lighting in paragraph 61 should not therefore stand. Secondly, roads and access, paragraph 62 to 64 of the report of handling. The report of handling states that, quote, overall, no significant road or transport impacts are identified and that the development conforms with policy 60B. We believe that the proposal fails to comply with both policy 60B and policy 15 of the LDP2, which is not even mentioned in the report of handling. Policy 60B states that, quote, all development proposals, including small-scale proposals, should A, be designed for the safety and convenience of all potential users, B, incorporate appropriate mitigation on-site and or off-site provided through developer contributions, which might include improvements and enhancements to walking, cycling networks and public transport services, unquote. The proposed solar farm access route for up to 27 HGVs per day is currently used by walkers and cyclists, has numerous bends, and now a proposed double junction on Pleasance Road, making it wholly unsuitable. The proposal has not addressed the safety of walkers and cyclists during the construction period. In addition, the suggested contribution to the improvement of outlying core paths does not compensate for the detrimental impact caused by the proposal on recognised pedestrian, cycle, recreational routes immediately within and adjacent to the site. As such, the proposal conflicts, therefore, with both Policy 60B, Transport Standards, and Policy 15, Public Access, as it also does not provide protection of well-used pedestrian and cycle routes and should therefore be rejected on the basis of both these policies. Thirdly, drainage and flooding. Report of handling paragraphs 65 to 68. The report of handling concludes that the development is not considered to comply with policy 53A and 53C of the LDP2, nor policy 22 of NPF4. But we believe the proposal also fails to comply with LPD policy 52, new flooding and development. Policy 52 states that, quote, there will be a general presumption against proposals for built development and land raising on a functional floodplain and in areas where there is a medium to high risk of flooding from any source or where the proposal would increase the probability of flooding elsewhere. We are concerned that the impact of flooding raised by numerous objectors has not properly been addressed in the applicant's submission. Photographs and videos detailing 4 floods in the last 10 years, including 2 within the last 2 years in February 21 and November 22, have been sent to planners. These show not only the fields in question completely flooded, but also the vehicle access to the electricity substation cut off by floodwaters, completely contradicting the applicant's statement in their own flood risk assessment, paragraph 1.7, that, quote, there is no record of historical flooding on this site and that the risk of flooding is, quote, negligible to low risk. This is simply not true. Evidence provided, including PKC's own EIA screening checklist, proves that the development is manifestly within an area of medium to high risk flooding. PKC's document says that. And yet, this has not been mentioned in the report of handling. There is a presumption in Policy 62 against built developments in such areas. Therefore, the application fails to comply with Policy 52, the new development and flooding, and should also be therefore rejected on this basis. Finally, with respect to reapplication and subsequent appeals, in paragraph 73 of the report of handling, it states that, quote, the development will impact local landscape qualities, including distinctive fullness of this location owing to its size, scale, location and form. In particular, the proximity to Cooperangus and direct impacts on the visual integrity from within the settlement and nearby, including along Pleasance Road, are raised as being of concern. It is not considered that the proposed planting will provide the necessary mitigation identified. Councillors should make note, please, that the specific mention of the proximity to Cooperangus. Therefore, if there is any reapplication or appeal, and even if the scale of the solar farm is amended slightly, the topography on rising ground and the location right next to the town of Cooperangus will never change. As such, any reapplication should be rejected as the site is clearly not appropriate, nor ever will be for such a development. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Can I ask members to submit questions? Councillor Massey.
Thank you for your deputation. It's very detailed. I just want to go back to something. You quoted policy 60B and 60BB. Could you go back over that and quote that again, please?
Yes, of course. Sorry, let me find it. I quoted policy 60BL from the LDB2, transport standards and accessibility requirements, new development proposals. And the quote I said that policy 60B states that, quote, all development proposals, including small scale proposals, in brackets, should A, be designed for the safety and convenience of all potential users, and B, incorporate appropriate mitigation on-site and or off-site provided through developer contributions, which might include improvements and enhancements to walking, cycling network and public transport services, unquote.
The reason I'm asking is because you've left out two words, because it does say provide through developer contributions where appropriate. Is there a reason why you left those two words out?
Thank you for that. No, the reason because I then went on to explain how those routes are used by cyclists and pedestrian walkers all the time. So I read it when one knows that local road, it's very obvious that having 27 HGVs a day going along there, in my opinion, in the opinion of many locals, is a safety problem. But it certainly wasn't to tailor that quote. I believe I quoted correctly, and I apologise if you feel that wasn't the case.
Thank you, Mr. Galloway. There's no further questions.
Sorry, Councillor Stewart, I was pretty slow off the mark there. Apologies. Mr. Galloway, thanks very much for the deputation, and to the gentleman before. I appreciate you taking the time here, and it's obviously quite an emotive subject. And one of the most important things is, and apologies if this has been covered and I've missed it, what level of public consultation has there been with residents in Cooperangus?
Thank you for raising that subject. Sorry, I didn't catch your name, but Councillor. Thank you very much for that question. You raise a very important question there. The unfortunate, one of the unfortunate aspects of the public consultation that was the requirement for this particular development was it coincided with the end of the COVID situation. There were 2 online consultations, the statutory minimum, but all of you will have seen the number of documents and objections that were submitted, many of which referenced the inadequacy of those sessions. One of the main frustrations was the lack of face-to-face consultation, because the population of Cooperangus who are affected, there's a lot of elderly people and people who aren't really au fait with the technology for dialing in. So the 2 unsatisfactory consultations took place, the full details of which are in my objection. I'm very happy to share with that offline if you'd like to see it again. But the long and the short of was it that the local population was left feeling, and I think I speak on their behalf, that they weren't properly consulted. There were a lot of unanswered questions, not least of which was in that first consultation. Many asked, can you show us some visuals of what this might look like? Some montages, which are very standard, and these are, you must have seen in many of applications, of what something will look like, taking into account the topography, the hills and that. To this date, not a single photo montage, despite that being minuted and requested by the public, has been provided by Arcus Consulting, the agent for Mr. Merchandise or Mr. Merchandise. Not a single image of what these fields would look like covered in panels. The answer to that's quite simple, because it will look dreadful to the eye, to most people's eye, and therefore at every stage the consultations were unsatisfactory. There were many requests for people face-to-face, and in fact Arcus Consulting held a face-to-face within that period for the battery storage facility that was later approved. Mr. Merchandani just repeated on each call we had with him, I don't have to, and so nothing happened.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks for asking me. Sorry, I came in a bit late there, but it's just something the gentleman said. There can be massive panels across the field. Looking at that map behind you, and I'll lead back to the question I asked the previous gentleman, in as much that we need to produce energy, and we're going to have to sacrifice some visuals because we need electricity. And I've asked this before when we've talked about wind turbines. We're going to have to accept that there are going to be changes in the short term. And is it not the case that the eye will get used to these as we've got used to wind turbines, and we got used to electric pylons going through our fields, which probably people objected to when they first went up, but now you drive past, you don't even notice them. Is it not the case that the eye begins to accept these things because of necessity rather than anything else?
Thank you. Firstly, again, I don't think anyone here is disputing the need to embrace green technology and renewables. As the previous speaker, deputation, pointed out, what we're really talking about here is the suitability of this particular site. There is one just across the A94 that's under consideration, Keithick, that your own planning officer rightly says is infinitely more suitable because you don't see it. It doesn't go right along a road. And one of the things about driving past this is that your own report of handling suggests that will be very dangerous because of the glint and glare for at least 20 years, 15 to 20 years while planting is established. That's the only mitigation that is really proposed in any of this, is planting for something that's a life of 35, or of 20 of which will be a safety hazard as well. But I completely accept your idea that we will have to identify sites, and sites are being considered all the time. But with the specific of this one is that it's bordered by the A94, the A923 today, and Pleasance Road hasn't even been considered. Now, many of you have kindly visited, I'm sure, the site and know the topography. You descend Pleasance Road down from Bulgersha, which is a north-facing slope, which is, again, is very strange to put south-facing panels on that. And you will not be able to mitigate that glare. And therefore, there are many, many reasons why this particular site is poorly chosen. And Mr. Galloway over talked about whether it's an economic reason and it's the falsity of having to be close to the substation. But I think you will be presented with numerous applications for solar going. It's believe me, we get things through our door all the time about land around it. So you're going to see a lot of this. And now it's the difficult job you'll have is discerning where the most suitable can be, so that not the whole of Strathmore is lost to solar, but at the same time it makes its contribution towards that important goal.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thanks for your deputation. Just following on from Councillor Leishman's question to you, has there been any consultation with the community over any community benefit scheme in relation to the development, considering the proximity with Cooper Angus? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very pertinent question, and I'd love to have mentioned more, but 10 minutes, and I don't want to bore everyone. But one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing is looking at best practice around solar developments. I participated in all of the Keithick public consultations before it went to the Scottish Government because of its size and because of battery storage associated with it. I also we've spoken to the Calais and the Berryfield over in Angus. And one of the things that emerged is that one of the key best practices around development should be that the developer should be listening to the local community, working in combination with the local community, and providing, where possible, facilities or some benefits for the people who are going to be having to look at this potential eyesore for 35 to 40 years. Mr. Merchandani has not proposed a single thing. There are no, your report of handling has a quote, which I don't have with me right here, but it's in my bag. It says, there are no benefits associated with this for the local community. So the answer is I don't believe there are any proposed.
Thank you.
Councillor James.
Yeah, again, there's a surprise. Thank you, Mr. Galloway. Great deputation from you and your brother, I believe. And I'm going to labour on the public consultation, which you seem to be quite unhappy with by the sound of it. Can I ask how, if it was a public consultation at Cooper Angus, how many people were in attendance and where was it, please?
So both public consultations for this were done online. There was no face-to-face consultation at all. The problem with online consultation, as you know, is that this is working very well today, but we've all know the challenges of Zoom and Teams meetings where one man's barking dog blares out everyone else. So, and it's also impossible to know how many people are present, because I think there were 50 to 60 people online, which Mr. Merchandani immediately seized upon as saying only 50 to 60 people care. Well, of course, there were husbands and wives and people. He then encouraged people for the second to meet up, which was against in houses. So the format for online consultations, when you have potentially hundreds of people trying to speak, is utterly unsatisfactory. But we were in an emergency situation where we had to do something, and he did strictly apply the minimum level of consultation. But the PKC was in receipt of numerous requests from elderly people. For example, my parents were not able to participate. They don't have a smartphone, they don't have a computer. And we know numerous people in Cooper Angus, when we made it our job to make them aware that this was coming, who had no idea it was coming at all, because and weren't able to participate. So there's certainly a large number of the community who feel they've been excluded. And it contrasts with the Keithick development, where they've been using the Red House Inn as a place for showing montages. All the things that we lacked on this one were presented there. And actually, I don't want to be combative. I'm quite happy to go there as a broad-minded person and listen to a developer saying, look, this is the argument for, this is our mitigation strategy, this is why we think this site is suitable. There was none of that. And as I say, not a single image or montage has ever been presented to anyone on this, which I think is a disgrace, and I think you will take your own view on that.
Mr. Galloway, we're 10 minutes on again, so I think you're definitely free to go this time. There's no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your time and patience.
Can I call on Dr. Kennedy? Morning, Dr. Kennedy. The usual format, 10 minutes to talk. I'll give you a reminder in 1 minute, and we've still got a lot of deputations to get through, so repeating. Okay, thank you.
The reason for my objection to this application for this enormous solar farm is because, if granted, it could endanger and indeed destroy medieval archaeological remains related to the Cistercian Abbey of Cooper Angus. You will be aware that Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust has recommended that if this development gets the go-ahead, a condition must be applied that 1/10 of the proposed area be the subject of an archaeological search programme in order to retrieve and protect any artefacts discovered and assess the area's potential for closer investigation. This approach, of course, is in line with National Planning Framework 4 for Scotland. I am concerned, however, that this may not be nearly enough to ensure the safety of what remains underground of the legacy of the Abbey. The Cistercian Abbey of Cuperangus was not just a wee church with a few monks pottering around, praying and doing a little gardening. It was a very important abbey. It came into being in the early part of the 12th century and remained there as a religious, commercial and agricultural centre for almost 400 years. It established a busy trade community and by the early 14th century controlled an astonishing 8,000 acres of land in the surrounding areas. Despite their foreign heritage, the hard-working monks and their abbey became deeply integrated into both the local and wider Scottish community. Along with other Cistercian abbeys in Scotland, including Melrose Abbey and Kinross Abbey, it established an important place in Scottish medieval history and in the history of religious thought. Indeed, as recently as 2016, a PhD thesis was presented at Stirling University on the significance of the Cuperangus Abbey and its part in history. The monks who came to Cuperangus had broken away from the Benedictines in France to form a back to basics, as it were, monastic order, which extended throughout Britain and large areas of Europe. They rejected what had become a comfortable lifestyle and returned to manual labour and a simpler life. In addition to worship, they took on agricultural work and became experts in cultivation and in drainage. They were not simply religious men, they were all-rounders in the true sense. Those white monks, as they were called, created this busy, thriving community around the Cuperangus Abbey, which was an important link in the chain of this new international monastic order. They established agriculture, fishing, crafts, trade, patronage, and landholding, and became one with the locality and immediate environment. It was not just a centre of worship in the area, it was pretty well the centre of everything. It is quite frankly inconceivable to imagine that such a large and well-run organisation of worship, farming and commerce, existing for 4 centuries in the small town of Cuperangus, has not left behind valuable evidence of its lifetime over a wide area around the town as it is today. Let me give you 2 instances of discoveries made very recently. Only 2 years ago, a beautifully built and well-preserved Cistercian well was found at a site in Pleasance, just 150 metres from the boundary of the proposed solar farm. 6 months later, in 2021, a medieval culvert for drainage was discovered a short distance away from that. Again, it was expertly built and well preserved. The culvert is just 100 metres from the boundary of this proposed development. Also, records discovered in the late 19th century show that Balgershow, which lies just a few metres from the boundary of the proposed solar farm, was considered to be, and I quote, one of the principal lands or granges of the abbey. In 1473, one tenant there was urged by his monastic landlords to improve the land by the building of houses. What may lie under the ground there, who knows? The small ruin to be seen in the grounds of the church as one heads out of Cuperangus to Dundee is thought to be the gatehouse of the abbey. Covered with moss, propped up by wooden slats, and jammed behind a fence right next to the road and the roaring traffic, is all that remains of the abbey buildings. It is a sad sight, but is nevertheless a powerful reminder of the important and unique Cistercian abbey which came to Cooperangus and the lands which surround it. Whatever decision is made regarding this application, please may we do our best to protect what is left of this amazing and unique historical legacy inherited by this small town. The best possible archaeological search is essential, whatever should take place. I thought I was only to do 5 minutes, so I'll press it again.
Are you willing to take questions? Can I call on members to submit questions? There's no questions. Dr. Kennedy, you're free to go. Can I call on Mr. Baxter? Usual format, Mr. Baxter, 10 minutes. I'll give you a prompt after 9, and if you can make any salient points that nobody else has made, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a resident living in Camp Muir on the proposed construction traffic route and wish to speak today about the major risk to pedestrians, cyclists and horse rider safety, especially focusing on the road noted as the C405, which represents 43% of the route from Woodside Crossroads to the entrance of this huge solar development. The two roads proposed for the construction traffic route are the C405 and C443. The Transport Planning Department has made recommendations for passing places to be made in the interests of pedestrian and traffic safety, but only for the C443. This is the section of road from Camp Muir to the site entrance and does not include the C405. The C405 is narrower than the C443 in many places, and the projected volume of construction traffic will result in a serious risk to pedestrians, dog walkers, cyclists and horse riders. The transport statement submitted by the developer as part of the application relates to the C405 as a road with a national speed limit, but fails to mention that there are 40 mph and 20 mph zones through Camp Muir, with no room for any HGVs to pass each other. The statement also refers to the fact there are no footways on this route. However, there are grass verges. These verges are so steep in many places it would be impossible to use them to get away from the passing HGVs. It's not possible to get the distance pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders are entitled to from passing vehicles for safety. The transport statement submitted with the application in section 4, paragraph 4.3 notes this proposed route for the construction traffic was originally used for the battery storage application passed in 2019. In the traffic management plan for the project, the holding area was the yard of Smith & Son, a coach depot, which also has a commercial vehicle repair garage plus caravan storage parking. The business activity at this bus garage has grown significantly since the battery storage application was approved and is already a major concern for pedestrians and cyclist safety without this additional construction traffic, as the caravan storage has created a blind corner. The photos used in the battery storage construction management traffic plan in 2021 and of the bus depot in particular were during COVID, when very little activity was taking place. This has changed significantly with a high volume of vehicles entering and leaving this proposed holding area each working day. The potholes across the road in the front of the access is evidence of this volume of traffic. I walked over the bridge on the corner at this garage site and there are gaps between the stone blocks and the bridge. This area is subject to flooding with heavy rain, resulting in the road being closed as happened a couple of months ago. The strong flow of water must increase the risk of erosion, and it would be good to know if a survey of the bridge has been done or requested to confirm if it is suitable for this increased volume of HGV vehicles. A point to note is the bridge further along the C405 on the east side of Campmuir already has a 16-ton restriction on it. The developer has provided a projected flow of the vehicle trips during the construction phase and detailed this in their transport statement. As an example of concerns, it states in paragraph 3 of the report of handling documents, it states the panels will be typically 60 to 72 cells per panel. 72 cell panels are typically rated between 350 and 400 watts per panel. This means it could be up to 142,500 panels, which is much more than the 86,845 panels used for the load calculations and volume of HGVs required to deliver the panels to site. I refer to the Berry Hill 49.9 megawatt project recently approved near Dundee, which noted 152,000 panels for their transport calculations, and this is the same size of scheme. Of course, there's new technology, but new technology often comes with additional cost, and at the end of the day, it will be a business decision based on cost and availability which panels they are selected to install. The increase in the HGV's deliveries just for the panels alone we go from a projected 289 movements up to 475 movements, a 64% increase in flow just for these deliveries. Based on the very high risk to pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders through Campmuir, and also noting the significant increase in activity and volume of traffic at the bus garage depot, is there a contingency plan if the owner of the bus depot refuses to give access for a holding area? For example, a further 100 metres past the bus depot, there's a farm access and road into West Bogershow Farm. It's almost a straight drive onto this farm road, which is owned by the landowner, who will be one of the greatest beneficiaries should this huge solar development get consent. This farm access is already used by HGVs, and a holding area could easily be constructed once the construction traffic are off the C405 road. It's a straight open road for approximately 400 metres to West Bogershow Farm, and from the farm there's approximately 160 metres to the boundary of where this huge solar farm is being proposed. This route would remove serious concerns and risk for pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders and non-construction traffic safety along both the C405 and C443 roads, and thus this will be considered along with all other objections and concerns as this application is determined. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you willing to take questions? I'll just give it a moment. There doesn't appear to be any questions. You're free to go, Mr. Baxter. Can I call on Mr. and Mrs. Button? I'm sure you're aware of the formats now. 10 minutes to talk. I'll give you a prompt after a minute, and if you would like to make other salient points, that'd be great. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for giving us the opportunity for our joint deputation this morning. I will be brief. We've covered many points from the excellent deputations that we've already heard, so I will be brief. I'm Chris Button, my wife Ros. We live east of Bogershow, which is one of the most severely affected properties on this proposal. Even the developer, in his report, classified it as major adverse and admitted that it would be 15 years before it went to minor adverse. Not quite sure what minor adverse means, but giving us a view of an industrial landscape with black plastic screens, 3 meters in the air, metal surrounds, poles, and a 2.4 meter security fence, visible from the front of our house as we look down along towards Pleasance Farm at the bottom. I would like to make it clear, can you hear me okay? I'd like to make it clear we're not opposed to green energy. I do realise that essential and urgent action is needed. But for solar farms, these aren't wind farms or factories. Solar farms require so much land. This one is over 200 acres. So very careful consideration. And I know our other delegation has mentioned Keithwick Mill. There we have to really seriously consider the location of where we're putting these solar farms and the effect on the local community and the loss of prime agricultural land. This, to me, must be one of the most outrageous solar farm proposals ever made. Everything is wrong with it, except it being next to a grid supply point, which is the cheapest and easiest method of connecting the solar farm to the network. They pay no respect to the effects on the landscape, being on a north-facing slope, clearly visible from both the Perth and Dundee roads. The visual impact on many surrounding properties, certainly in the field to the east of Pleasance Road. The flooding issues that have been mentioned, the loss of over 200 acres of prime agricultural lands. These are all identified in the report from the Perth and Kinross Planning Department as reasons for refusal. We have, as a group of local residents, been working for a year now to ensure the implication of this plan is understood by the local residents, as we've mentioned about the Zoom calls, etc., and giving our concerns as feedback to the planning committee, and to see that all our major concerns are highlighted as reasons for refusal. So in that respect, I can say no more, except to fully agree and support the conclusions of the planning report with its 5 reasons for refusal. And I trust that the committee will be of the same opinion. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, convener, for giving us this opportunity to speak. A sense of place and the environmental quality where we live is a very complex subject for debate and discussions. We all know that. Today, I wish to make a declaration to uphold the landscape in all its natural state and to celebrate the rural environment where I live. As my husband has said, we're not against solar energy, but it's definitely the proximity of this development which is very large. I've lived at Easter Belgashow on the outskirts of Cooper Angus now for 16 years, and I certainly wouldn't be considered to be a local. But in spite of this, I'm settled within a very unique area of the rural Perthshire, and that is the Vale of Strathmore, with its very rich heritage and agricultural setting. Cooper Angus, as is so many places, not just in Scotland, but over the whole of the United Kingdom, are currently facing the most enormous environmental challenge of maybe this century so far. It is now almost a year to the day when we first heard that a major plan for a solar farm was being discussed right on our doorstep. one which would visually affect a huge number of local residents due to its huge scale and its close proximity to this small rural town. Visually, this would appear like a huge tsunami of high-mounted solar panels installed like a blanket covering as far as the eye would see down into the village. Ideally, local place plans potentially offer a platform for an open, face-to-face debate with all parties concerned, as with other developments. However, as has already been said, online consultations during this COVID period left many feeling ignored and not part of a more collaborative approach, as in many other places. The proposal would have major impact on the landscape, and the visual impact would be hugely affected. Taking in the panoramic views across to the glens and beyond, these are unrivaled views from the Strathmore Vale to the foothills and uplands of the Grampian Mountains to the north. Solar panels reach a height of 3 meters. That is the current design of them, with fencing and intrusive use of CTV, has the potential to turn the area on the edge of Cooper Angus into a static, bleak, monotonous appearance, lifeless, dark-edged structures which completely deaden the landscape. All this appearance is in stark contrast to the existing spacious agricultural landscape, which changes with the seasonal crop rotations and where the light and the shadows accentuate the topography of the landscape from so many vantage points and angle, both from the town and all the minor roads up towards the Sidlaws, as well as up to the glens as you enter down into the town. COVID, as we know, had a huge impact on how people spent their time in a local area. The small minor roads which lead from the town to North Corston and Campmuir are all designated walking, cycling and horse riding routes. There's a lot of scientific research that mention that what we absorb visually has a neurological effect on our brains. Nature and landscape provides an immersive experience. It engages the mind and rest from other concerns. Connecting with the environment is vital to our health, mental health. So visualizing a static sea of black hard-edged panels on such a huge scale will accentuate a very bleak, depressing industrial landscape, which is totally contrary to a natural one. Currently, there are no photomontage visualization on how the panels will appear. And although mitigation is considered with tree planting, I don't feel confident that young trees that will be planted will all survive. And also, there's a very strong gale force wind which could potentially wreak havoc on such an exposed north-facing site. So in conclusion, I'm in total agreement with the summary that was made by the councillors, by the planning department, and would request that this application is rejected.
Thank you. Willing to take questions? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just to ask the question to you that was based on some of the earlier question on the consultation from the developer with yourself. Can I just ask what your experience of that was, and especially in relation to chatting to you about potential mitigation? Thank you.
I didn't quite catch the end of the question about the mitigation, sorry. Well, the consultations were very unsatisfactory, and as has been said before, there was hardly any discussion, and the discussions were very inadequate. And
so could I just, I had a meeting with a certain Mr. Swiddy right at the beginning, and he was of the opinion that such a large development must not or should not have been held by Zoom. He recommended to this noble council that they put pressure on the developer to hold a 1 or 2 day exhibition where people could come in, see the plans, see the developer, talk about it, and have their fears raised or not raised, but at least there would have been a dialogue. But that didn't happen. All we had was, it said, 2 1 hour or 2 hour Zooms, which were totally ineffective. So anyway.
if I could just say one more thing, that you know, fast forward over the year, I think we've both been obsessed with all these developments that are national, you know, not just in Scotland. And one of the things is that some of the very big developments do have weeks of face-to-face consultations where the whole community are engaged, there are questions asked, and there's a much more understanding of what's going on. I mean, this is like, it feels like it's been kind of, you know, I don't know, it's not satisfactory.
Totally not satisfactory.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Unfortunately, Councillor Waters pretty much asked the question I was going to ask you, but I just wanted to thank you for your presentation and compliment you, Mrs. Button, for a very descriptive presentation. Painted a perfect picture. I could listen to more, to be honest. But just following on from that question, the consultation, you obviously were involved in that. Was it just a presentation, or were you allowed to ask questions and get answers back? I mean, what was the general format of it?
Sorry, did you mean at the Zoom meeting?
Because they were both online, weren't they? So was it just a presentation and that was it, or were you allowed to ask questions and get feedback?
It was purely a presentation, somewhat shambolic. I think the organisation of any presentation with, I think the first meeting we had was with 10 or 11 participants. Our organisation in Cooper Angus, we managed to gain sufficient interest. The second one had over 52 participants on a Zoom meeting. The organisation was not sufficient to allow effective dialogue. I mean, unless you have this a control. So it was, I would hate to say, but it was almost a shambles. So we were given maps like that, as was mentioned. We saw no photos of what it would look like from anywhere. We saw photos of empty fields, and we saw a map. And to my recollection, that was about it, apart from Mr. Merchant Darley, as he said, sitting there saying, I don't have to do any more. The government says this is all I have to do, and goodbye.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I think what I was trying to understand, and you know, I was at a consultation, not, you know, didn't comment or participate, but with wind farms, and when a local resident that would be affected by the application said that he stayed nearby, in the consultation process, the developer asked, well, can we get your address and come and visit you and chat about what's going on? I think what I'm trying to ask you, did that happen with you? Given that you're actually staying, you know, right next to where the development was there any consultation with you directly, given that you will be affected more than most?
There was no dialogue at all. In fact, it's almost a year to the day since we first heard about the development, and we had to hear via neighbours that this was happening. And one of the things that well, that was really, you know, we were in complete shock, really, to begin with. So nobody approached us. The developer or the landowners never approached us. And I think that's one of the things that I'd like to say. I feel that I'm not standing on just, you know, the fact that we live on a potential site where we will see it. But I feel as though I'm standing on behalf of the community as well, for those who feel strongly who are not able to be here today, who don't have the wherewithal and the understanding of what some of these local development plans involve. And I think maybe the whole system seems to separate rather than and divide from, you know, a sort of democratic means of being able to engage with all kinds of people, you know. And as I say, I've been aware of many big solar farm developments down in over the border, and there's a lot of emotive feeling about it. Yes, we do need to have new renewable energy at this time of crisis. We also need much more discussion, I feel, about the use of the land for food. And I think potentially over the next year, things are going to get very difficult for people. And one of the things, I mean, reading through some of the local development plan initiatives where mental health, there's supposed to be dialogues between health and planning, you know, where people, I mean, just on a small scale, people coming from the town, walking around, you know, suffering from severe depression with what's been going on over the last few years. So I feel that all these issues, rather than just be quickly debated, you know, need to have much more sensitive and debating. Okay. Sorry. On from that, really, sorry.
Thank you for your answer.
There appears to be no further questions, so you're free to go. Thank you. Can I call on Mr. Mercandani, please? I believe he's online.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mercandani. If you'd like to make your deputation, you'll have 10 minutes and I'll prompt you after 9 and I'll let you conclude with a minute to go. If you'd like to proceed.
Thank you very much. Dear members of the Planning Committee, my name is Vikram Mirchandani and I have been a clean energy developer for the last 20 years, developing wind, battery and solar projects all across the UK. You should know me as I've had dealings with Perth and Kinross Council before. In fact, you just approved my battery application only a couple of years ago, and so in my eyes, you're pro-renewable energy and we're partners in my fight to reverse climate change. Now I'm aware that in the case of my Market Hill solar development, your officer is recommending refusal. My purpose today is to ask you to overturn your officer's recommendation and approve my project. Maybe at this point, you're thinking I'm bonkers and it'll never happen, but I ask you to be open-minded for a moment and hear me out. Let me tell you why I think you should approve my application. And the answer is quite simple. The responses from the statutory consultees do not justify a refusal of this scheme. Let's look at your own officer's report. Out of the 9 external consultees, 8 have no objection to the scheme. And the only one that objects to this scheme is Ketton's Parish Community Council. And there are 2 interesting things to note about the Ketton's Parish Council objection. The first is that the Parish Council are not a technical consultee like the Scottish Environment Agency, and they simply represent public opinion. The second point to note here is if we want to assess public opinion on the solar farm and get the full picture, we must take the other parish council, Blair Gowrie and Rattray, views into account also. Now let's face it, Blair Gowrie and Rattray Parish Council are not so bothered about this scheme at all. They didn't even bother to respond to the consultation request. So to sum up, half the parish councils consulted don't care whether the scheme goes ahead or not. It's simply not that big of a deal. This, in my view, is the true picture of public opinion. Now let's get on to the 9 internal consultees to the Market Hill solar application. 8 have not objected, and again, only 1 has objected. The objection is from your council flood risk officer and is a holding objection based on him requiring clarification regarding on-site flooding and drainage. In your officer's report, it's acknowledged that the flood risk officer considers that these issues are likely to be able to be addressed. So our position is if your planning officer had informed us that this issue concerned him 3 months ago, we could have provided him with the clarification and he would have withdrawn his objection in 5 minutes. So my suggestion for going forward is if you want to approve this solar scheme, the easy solution is to implement a planning condition that says no development can go ahead until we've satisfied your flood risk officer. We're happy to resolve this issue as a planning condition because it's actually relatively easy to resolve, right? And in fact, last week, we actually submitted information that provided the clarifications, and we believe if the flood risk officer just looks at it, he would withdraw his objection. So now we've dealt with the consultee responses to the application, which I don't believe justify a reason for refusing the scheme. Let's deal with the reasons for refusal in your officer's report. The 3 broad reasons for refusal, broadly, are landscape, agricultural land, and flood risk. I've already dealt with the flood risk issue and explained that we could agree to a planning condition, as this is a very easy reason for refusal to resolve. Now let's address the second reason for refusal, and that's cumulative loss of agricultural land. At the outset, please note that the loss of agricultural land for this site on its own is not a reason for refusal. Your officer acknowledges it in his report. Your officer wants to refuse the scheme because of loss of agricultural land when this site is considered along with the Kethik scheme. So the first point to note here is I don't even believe this argument is valid. For a start, the Kethik scheme is not approved and it may never be approved. And therefore, this reason for refusal is invalid from day one. Okay? Secondly, and this is a more important point actually, there's a great report from Solar Power UK in relation to the facts about solar powered agricultural land, which has actually been written to aid planning officers. This explains that the greatest threat to food security is actually climate change, as by 2050, if climate change happens, 75% of the best and most versatile agricultural land will no longer be fit for its purpose. And so solar farms actually protect and enhance food security, not the other way around. We sent your planning officer this report only last week. My point is simple. The cumulative loss of agricultural land from the Market Hill solar farm combined with the Kethik solar farm is not a valid reason to refuse this application. In fact, in my view, it's a reason to approve both. And this is, again, beyond any reasonable doubt if you actually read the report. Now I'd like to address the final reason for refusal, and this is landscape. And I'm going to address this broadly as I'm conscious of time constraints. So first, many people here have questioned whether this is the right location. So I want to look at it from top down, and I want to just explain something about why we chose this site. One, it's not in a nationally designated area for landscape protection like a national park. It's not in a regionally designated area for landscape protection like any area of outstanding natural beauty. It's not even in a locally designated area for landscape protection. So in fact, the nearest locally designated area for landscape protection is 2.5 kilometers away, and there won't even be an effect on it. So the conclusion is, when you look at it top down, our site is in an unprotected area for landscape. And this is exactly where you're supposed to put solar farms. Okay? So now I've explained, why this is the right site, looking at a bird's eye view top down. I'd like to explain why this site is the correct site from bottom up at a micro level. The fact of the matter is, the site is adjacent to the substation. Okay? That means there's going to be no disruption from, cables, digging. There's none of that here. It's next to the substation. Secondly, the site is adjacent to the battery project of mine that you previously consented. Okay? Thirdly, there's an overhead line going right through the middle of the site. So the conclusion is electricity infrastructure is prevalent all over this site. No one could ever say it's almost like one could say there's precedent for electricity generating infrastructure at this site on a micro level. The substation, the battery, we're right next door. I hope now you see that this is the perfect site for a solar farm. It's the logical next step after the substation and the battery. Okay, and by approving this solar farm, it keeps all your electricity generating infrastructure in one compact area. Substation, battery, solar farm, compact, locally area. Okay. So the other thing to note is, when we consulted your planning officer, Jamie Torrance, right at the outset, he even wrote in his pre-app response that this solar farm site would be supported. Okay, we actually have it in black and white. Okay, so now I've addressed whether this is the right location for a solar farm, both from a bird's eye view and a micro view. I want to talk about landscape mitigation. Your officer seems to acknowledge that the landscape mitigation, once it's fully grown after 15 years, is adequate to screen the site. If I've understood correctly, his concern with our landscape mitigation is primarily to do with the immediate effect on the surroundings. His conclusion is that for the first decade, there'll be no screening and no landscape mitigation. Well, this is clearly false for a start, and secondly, it's again too easy to fix. The reason he's misunderstood is because there's a continual growth of plants that will do the screening. Every year they grow more and more and more. So how can you conclude there will be no screening and screening mitigation in the first 10 years? What he should have done is simply ask for clarification. How long will it take for the plants that do the screening to grow to the height of the panels? Simple. But he never even asked for the clarification, so he didn't give us a chance to respond. Anyway,
Mr. Mercandani, that's 1 minute to go if you'd like to conclude, please.
Yeah, that's fine. For me, I've always believed that where there's a will, there's a way. So let's talk about the easy fix that should make your planning officer happy. Why don't you just create a planning condition that says for the screening, we have to use mature trees from day one that are 3 meters in height. Then there can be no doubt that from day one, the screening will have an immediate impact to reduce the visual impact of our solar farm. The last point is size and scale of this solar farm. Well, the answer is now you've got to take into account the planning balance. Scotland has huge targets for renewable energy, and you're world leaders, okay, in renewable energy. If you're going to deliver, according to NPF4, which has just been adopted, whatever it was last month, you're going to need to approve a whole lot more of these schemes. And why not start with this one? It's a good scheme in the right location, and it'll deliver on the targets and keep Scotland, with the great reputation it has as world leader. Anyway, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I really do hope you overturn your officer's recommendation and approve my solar farm. Thanks very much.
Okay, Mr. Mercandani, are you willing to take questions?
Yes, I am, of course.
Councillor Leishman.
Thanks very much, Vice Convener Stewart. I've got 2 questions, both very, very short. Can I be permitted to ask them both?
Please.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, Mr. Marchandani. Thank you for your deputation. It's excellent to get both sides of the argument, as it were. The first bit of my question is, how many solar farms do you own and operate?
None. This is my first solar farm development. In the old days, I did wind. I then did battery. This is my first solar farm project.
Okay, thanks. Just doing a wee bit of research online about solar farms. Have you considered combining productivity on the farm in the style of agrivoltaic farming, apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly, by growing fruit and vegetables underneath the solar panels?
We see, for us right now, that wasn't really the priority, because we figured this is a temporary loss of farmland anyway, and it'll give the soil a chance to regenerate by not having things planted on it for 30 years, right? The soil nutrients will improve with having they'll just take a break from farming for 30 years. They'll come back better.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I've got a couple of questions, if I may, but I'll split them if you wish. Good afternoon, Mr. Merchandani, and thank you again for your deputation. One of the points raised by objectors is the lack of any consultation, any physical consultation. I think there's been 2 online consultations via Zoom. Can I ask why there was no, I mean, bearing in mind this is an important project from the development of green energy point of view, and for you yourself, why there was no physical consultation to deal with public objections. And leading on from that, another point was that in cases such as these, there's often a degree of benefit for the local community that's arranged either through a fund or through supporting other projects. There doesn't seem to be anything of that kind in this case. Could I ask you about that as well?
Sure. I'll start with the consultation. Yeah. Please note this was done in a time of COVID, right? And the government regulations suggested that online consultation would be adequate. We followed government guidelines, right? That's the first thing. And the planning officer himself said the consultation is adequate, right? So we didn't break any, we didn't do anything less than we were supposed to do. That's the first point. The second thing to tell you is over and above those consultations, I even joined SOAR, the local group is called SOAR, Save Our Rural Environment. I even joined their Facebook group and engaged in, frankly, a lot of attempts to consult on that group, right? So that's the second thing I did. And the third thing I did is I offered not face-to-face, I offered one-on-one Zoom consultations with residents. And I said I would do as much one-on-one consultation as they wanted, because frankly, it's COVID and a lot of my guys were like, look, there's health and safety. And the other reason was I was having a baby and my wife wasn't happy for me to like expose my baby to, to extra COVID risk. So that's the first point on consultation. I hope I've addressed that. Now let me talk on the community benefits, right? I tried very hard to engage with the community and tell them to suggest community benefits for me to consider in the application. I tried really hard. The truth of the matter is, no one came up with any suggestions for community benefits that they wanted. I concluded they didn't really want to engage. They didn't want to make the scheme to help me in any way, shape, or form. On the contrary, they just wanted to block me consulting rather than engage with me and consult to improve the scheme and get community benefits in place. In the absence of having any local resident feedback on community benefits that would be useful or helpful, I decided that we had to take unilateral decisions. And I think in the end, it was decided that all the core parts in that area we would, improve and maintain. I hope I've addressed the questions adequately.
Thank you, Mr. Merchandise. If I can just come back on a couple of things. First of all, I appreciate, obviously, maybe there's been a lack of consultation from the members of the public about benefits, but many of the wind farms formulate a fund which a community can draw on to get benefits at a later date. And I wonder why you perhaps haven't thought of that. And going back to the consultations, these Zoom meetings were, according to my document in front of me, in March 23rd and 2nd of April 2022. There's been plenty of time since then. We're now in February 2023. Plenty of time between those dates and now to have had some form of public consultation with photographs and pictures of what it would look like. I wonder why you haven't taken up that opportunity.
Well, for me, we offered one-on-one Zoom meetings. Anyone could have called me. I would have set up Zoom calls with anyone who wanted it. I was 100% available.
I would have thought.
So I did what I had to. I did what I had to do. Is the point. I tried my best, even engaging on Facebook, right, as much as I could, offering one-on-one meetings. But if the fact of the matter is, people don't want to. If I put my hand out and say shake it, no one wants to shake it. What can I do?
Well, I understand, but I think a Zoom meeting is one thing, but something as important as this and the size of this, the effort to have perhaps come up and had a public consultation, the latter part 2022, for example, may have been beneficial to you and to the objectors, of course.
Possibly, but I mean, what do you want me to tell you? I did what I felt was adequate.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Braun. Can I remind members to ask questions and try and stick to them, please? Councillor James.
Thanks, Convener. Mr. Merchandani, thanks for your deputation. I've got to say, elephant in the room is the most arrogant and condescending deputation I think I've ever heard. Very, very dismissive.
Excuse me, Councillor James, could we stick to questions, please?
Yeah, I am. I'm just getting on to it, Convener. Just 35 years isn't a temporary loss of land. It's a long time. And you say that there's a lot of all the things that are up for rejection can be easily rectified. Can I ask why you didn't put those in the application in the first place, please?
Well, normally how it works, right, is we put in an application, and if the officer has concerns, he tells us what they are and gives us a chance to address them. We never got that opportunity. So we actually thought until we got the officer's report, we were led to believe we're getting officer's recommendation for approval. We actually thought we were getting officer's recommendation for approval as early as November. And we thought this is coming to committee in December with a recommendation for approval. Suddenly to hear that, it's pushed back to February and then last minute to get a recommendation for refusal was just shocking to us. But especially because look at the consultee responses. Frankly, there just aren't any objections.
Convener, can I ask a follow-up to that then, please?
Sure.
Quickly, please.
Okay, sorry. You say there's no other objections, but I think SSEN have a holding objection, which I think is quite important because their lines go across your site, and it would depend on the layout of your site, admittedly, but there is another objection from a consultee.
Yeah, but they withdrew it.
Okay, can we move on, please? Councillor Anderson.
My question, Mr. McDaniel, is on employment. If it's approved, 200 acres plus of agricultural land, the loss of jobs in that is probably 3 to 4 men or women, sorry. I'm just wondering how many jobs your development will give the area, Kilparangus area, over. Thank you.
Okay, well, the answer is that I don't have that information to hand, but you've got a whole bunch of construction jobs, then you've got a whole bunch of operations and maintenance jobs, right? And then the extra income to the landowner, he's obviously going to spend it because they're all local. So how are the locals not going to benefit?
Well, I was speaking about employment straight, not money going into someone's pocket as such. Employment for the locals in the area that I'm looking at.
Imagine the construction jobs.
Because construction's just flash maybe 3 to 4 months, and that's a job over. The farm is installed, the solar farm's installed. How many people will be employed?
Might be a little more than that. That information would be in the application. I don't have it to hand. I apologize.
Okay.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks for asking me. Sorry, Mr. Merchandani, just a follow-up question. It was really what happens to the solar farm after 35 years, if they're no longer required, or even if other energy sources come online when solar farms become obsolete. Is it your intention that they would be lifted out?
Exactly right. We decommission it. We decommission it. So at the end of the life, we come in and take all the equipment away. And, Bob's your uncle. You're back to your farmland which is new and improved, nutrient richer, and, back to normal, even better than before.
Okay, Mr. Merchandani, there appears to be no further questions, so you're free to go. And I'll
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll hand you back to the convener.
Thank you to everyone for their deputations. That was really interesting. Can I ask members if they have any questions for officers?
If it's approved, 200 acres plus of land, lots of jobs, and that is probably 3 to 4
Councillor Waters.
I just have a very quick initial question to understand the size of the site and the where we become the planning legal a bit of approval, and this idea that it's just that, and I think there's other sites as well where they're just under the 50 megawatt level, and anything above that will go to the Scottish Government and the Energy Consents Unit. Can I ask it, can you confirm that is right? Because we see them quite often just below the 50, and if they do go to the Energy Consents of Scottish Government, are they then required to provide an environmental impact assessment, or do they, within their own process, do a screening to determine if an environmental impact assessment is required?
Firstly, yes, if it's 50 megawatts or more, it would be a national development and dealt with by the Energy Consents Unit, and the Energy Consents Unit would need to determine whether or not an environmental impact assessment was undertaken through a screening.
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Given Mr. Merchandani's delegation, which I have to agree with Councillor James on, officers, are you satisfied with the conditions, your reasonings for offering this for refusal to us, given his list of debate over your considerations? Thank you.
Yes.
Do we have any more questions? Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, Convener. I was just wondering if officers would like to comment on the deputation from the developer, which suggested that the application may be coming to committee or may be recommended for approval in November. Or did I pick that up wrong?
I think we're here to debate and consider the application before us, and any future applications presented to this committee will be for that committee to debate and consider. If we're talking about the application across the way, I think that's an Energy Consents Unit proposal, so it wouldn't be coming before us for consideration.
Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Convener. The developer mentioned the lack of response from Blairgowrie and Rattray Community Council. Would this development have any impact on Blairgowrie and Rattray? Is it in their area?
The impact, well, what I would say is it would be for that community council to comment on the views of the community council. It appears that they chose not to.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Convener. Just the cumulative, just a question on the cumulative effect of this and the other applications that one of the deputations mentioned, Collies, that there's one in the pipeline for there. We have the other one that's mentioned in the report, and we have this one, all within a reasonably close proximity. And just to ask, especially around the loss of prime agriculture, is there, do we do a cumulative type of impact, and especially I think one of the deputations as well mentioned that we have an issue, over food security and stuff, and that has to be a consideration. And just want to ask, how much do we look at the cumulative effect of loss of agriculture in relation to our food security issues?
Again, I would just say that that's one of the reasons for refusal. If you look at reason 4, that we have considered cumulative impact and have concerns in that regard.
Thank you, everyone. Seems to be no more further questions, and we've received a motion from Councillor Ian James. Want to speak to it?
Yeah, thanks, convener. For me, it's having listened to the deputations from the objectors and from Mr. Merchandani himself, and having read the massive amounts of documentation that we've had put before us. I mean, a huge amount of paperwork to go through. But I sat and I've read every letter, and Jamie's report. I'm delighted actually to see that it's come up as a rejection, which I'm very, very happy to go with, and his 5 reasons. However, having listened to in fact, both Mr. Galloway's today, in their deputations, they mentioned flooding, which is policy 52. I've got the LDP up in front of me on my other screen. I think we should add that, and I don't know if that's competent. Mr. Fogg will no doubt tell me. Policy 15, public access, was mentioned, and also roads 60B, I think, was the policy number for that. And the other important one, which actually I hadn't picked up on myself, but is I think it was David Galloway brought it up. I've written down residential amenity, glint and glare on Pleasance Road. I think that's very, very important as well. And he did say something about it that there's, or you wouldn't be able to mitigate for glint and glare. So I'd recommend the officer's recommendations for or reasons for refusals, plus those items which I'd like added, please. Thank you.
Convener, with reference to Councillor James' motion, which I've taken to be to support the officer's report of handling, but to add additional reasons for refusal, specifically flooding, roads and access, and impact on residential amenity. Firstly, in relation to flooding, I would refer Councillor James to the 4th reason for refusal, which is a flood reason already. So I feel it's already covered in the recommendations in front of you. As regards flooding,
I think that Mr. Galloway actually specifically stated policy 52. I know we've got 53A and A and C, I think it is. But I think he mentioned 52, which is new flooding, because it's, the last 2 years it's flooded. I'm just wondering if that's relevant, please.
I think you have to bear in mind, though, that this is a solar farm. It's not residential, and in the absence, we've had a response from the flood officer, and they're not founding on that, and I don't think you've got technical support for a flood-based reason beyond that which is stated here as the 5th reason for refusal, I'm afraid.
Okay, in relation your professional knowledge.
In relation to roads, I would have to refer you to the transport planning consultation response, and they are content that there's capacity in the local road network for this proposal, and therefore they are not objecting to this for that reason. And unless you can identify a reason to say why the paragraph 33 is effectively wrong, and why Mr. Salmon is wrong to be content with it, I don't think you've got sufficient to advance that as a further reason for refusal beyond the 5 reasons that are in the report. The last one is glint and glare, and I think I'd defer again to Christian on that, because as I understand it, we did consult with environmental health, and we have a representative of environmental health pollution control team here, but they did not oppose it, although I was aware that one of the objectors said that regard wasn't given to Pleasance Road. So I don't know if further information should be sought at this late stage in relation to that one aspect. But the other 2, I feel, are not sustained by the information before you. Okay,
thanks, Jeff. I know we have, our officers go to great lengths to do these reports, and our professionals. But I think our greatest assets and our local experts, if you like, are the people that live with it on a daily basis. And that's the reason I think his policy 60B on the transport, it was safety of designed for the safety and convenience of all potential users. With and I see where they're coming from there with that many HGVs down a narrow road. I just think it's another to incorporate appropriate mitigation on site or off site through developer contributions. I think that's what he was picking up on.
Yes, I think the policy to which you're referring, Councillor James, doesn't apply to this this proposal. After construction, there will be very limited vehicle movements associated with the application. It would have to be controlled through the construction phase, and the advice is that that can be done. I just don't think the policy you're referring to there is opposite to this application.
Okay, I get that. Going back to the flooding then, Jeff, I said about adding 52, policy 52 for the flooding. We've added 53, but that's for drainage. You know, that's, you know, 53A was water environment, 53C is surface water drainage, but it's actually flooding. So, you know, that's why I think Mr. Galloway mentioned that in his deputation. That's why I asked for that. Picked up on that. I've got scribbled notes here, so I don't know if that is valid then. Okay.
Councillor James, can you repeat what question are you asking here?
I know Mr. Fogg said that he didn't think it would be competent to add the flooding element, you know, when I asked for flooding to be put on, which is policy 52, because it's already mentioned in 53, you know, water is already mentioned in 53, policy 53A and C. 53A and C is specifically about drainage rather than actual flooding.
Yeah. Councillor James, I don't think we have the flood officer here today, but we do have a response, and that wasn't raised as their concern. They referred to policies 53A and C in relation to drainage, as you say. They had the opportunity to address flood concerns, and they did not do so. I can't come back to this is a solar farm, so I think you'd have to ask, you know, potentially there would be damage to the development itself, but it's not as if we're looking at a chalet park or a caravan park or a residential development where I think the flood risk would be heightened. So I'm struggling to see why the possibility of flooding here would constitute a reason for it not proceeding, given the nature of the development concerned.
Okay, fine. I take your professional advice, Jeff. Thank you.
Can I then ask Councillor James, are you putting forward a motion for refusal on the grounds that are contained within the report of handling?
Yes, please, convener. If none of the other points that I've raised are competent, then yes, I'm more than happy with what's on the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. I believe that Councillor Leishman, you seconded the motion.
Thanks very much, convener. Yes, I'm content to second Councillor James's motion. And just as a short comment, I'll be very brief with it as well. I think we're all aware that the need for different methods of power and energy is massively important. We've got a responsibility to future generations as time is of the essence in becoming greener and trying to halt the damage that we've already done to our environment. But we also have a responsibility, I think, to look after prime agricultural land. And I think Mr. Galloway, the second Mr. Galloway, was quite right in saying we have a current fruit and vegetable shortage. And I think this will be an ongoing problem that we have to tackle as we adjust the decisions and strategies that are above this committee. I would also echo Councillor Braun earlier on. I'm supportive of different types of energy. My voting record on battery storage facilities shows that, and I agree with Councillor Braun in regard to changing visuals of solar farms, and that a culture change of acceptance will need to happen by the public at large. The benefits of this facility of this type Just can't be on a wide scale though. They also have to be a partner for the local community, and I don't think the spot we have discussed today and debated would do that. So I'm content to second Councillor James.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman. Can I ask if there are any amendments? No amendments, so we'll go straight on to comments. And the first comment is from Councillor Anderson.
As a local member for the Strathmore ward, I would like to, well, be very happy to go along with Councillor James's move. I'm surprised that Mr. Merchant-Danny went to Blairgowrie and Rantry Community Council rather than Kettins, who have objected and are the closest community council to the site. But I say that's for him to reason why. The loss of agricultural land is another one I'm very concerned about. I'm sure it's mentioned in the deputation, so the first four I was very happy with and concurred with. They mentioned about being close to the substation. First speaker spoke, there was no requirement for it to be adjacent to a substation. It could be connected in the lines somewhere else online. Therefore, one could use possibly less favourable agricultural land for the use of these solar farms rather than prime agricultural land, and whether the council can investigate that question, because it's going to be something that's going to come up again and again over the next few years. But I say I'm very happy with the recommendation. I say, and I've visited Cooper Angus quite a few times since being elected councillor in that area, and the impressions I got from people was that they were not happy with the application. I could not see any more, since being a member of the Planning Committee, one shouldn't discuss or give any visual directions of what one's own opinions might be. So I left it at that, but that was the general opinion I felt I was getting from Cooper Angus over this last period. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Braun, you have a comment.
Thanks, Convener. This has been an unusual debate today, because in the past, when we have a piece of open land such as this, a field, we're usually debating whether we should build on it with houses or commercial development, or dare I say, digging up for a quarry. This has been an unusual one, because we're having to debate between the use of land for growing food, which we know is essential and will limit climate emissions, against the need to generate electricity. And we, electricity is our lifeblood. We're surrounded by it as we sit here now, and we all know there's a need for it. And we have to find some alternatives for fossil fuels. My inclination would have been that electricity generation is the prime importance. But my belief has always been that when we're talking about climate emissions, the driving force behind these things should be to tune ourselves with the environment, to better ourselves with the environment. But we have to, in doing that, we have to ensure that we recognise what that environment is. And in this particular case, it's a massive development which is going to eat into the natural countryside, rural countryside of Cooper Angus. And also, as one of the objectors pointed out, in looking to tomorrow, we shouldn't ignore yesterday either. I have to say that in reading the report of handling, reading all through the objections, listening to the developer, I can't help but feel there has been a degree of contempt for the people of Cooper Angus in the way this has been handled, totally from start to finish. The lack of communication, it's an important project for the developer, and important for the people of Cooper Angus. And there should have been more effort, I think, to come up here and have a physical consultation with people. And the lack of that and the offer of doing a Zoom face-to-face is no more easier for somebody who doesn't have a digital technology to do than if it's a group consultation. So I think, to be honest, overall, as I say, a degree of contempt for the people of Cooper Angus, and the lack of any form of fund for the local community to use to benefit themselves. So, Convener, I am quite happy that the planners have refused this. And I completely concur with every reason they've put forward. And I'm happy to see this refused in total. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. I echo those sentiments that you've just put. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Convener. There's no question that we need to build renewable energy sources and varied renewable energy sources into our infrastructure: wind, solar, hydro, wave. They all need to be part of the big picture of where we're going as a country to power ourselves. They are a priority for what we want to deliver, but in no way should developers feel that they can cut corners and it will just be their applications will be accepted based on the fit, one of the key criteria. They do have to go through a process. They do have to build competent applications that do benefit us all. A lot of the comments I absolutely agree with that have already been made, but I would like to just make, probably carrying on from what Councillor Braun has said, but one of the refusals for this is due to the inadequate mitigation and seeking to offset landscape concerns. And I would like to suggest that part of the reason for that is the consultation with the communities just hasn't been there in the way that I believe that it should be for a project of this scale and size. And it's important that when you do bring these type of applications forward, that the community is at the heart and soul of it. And maybe then there might have been better mitigations coming forward to help deal with that helped alleviate some of the concerns that the community feel over the application. And again, I would just echo that I fully agree with the recommendation and the reasons that have come from the officers today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. As there is no more further comments, the application is refused on the grounds detailed in the report of handling. Thank you.
Could we have a recess?
Yes, can we have
5 minutes?
Have 5 minutes? Yeah. Thank you. Did you hear that, Councillor James? 5 minutes we're taking.
Can't unmute. Yeah, thanks very much for that, Convener.
Okay, everyone. Right, we move on to the next item, which is the extension to the quarry at Balado Quarry, Balado. And to introduce the report is Mr. Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. And the application now before us proposes to extend an area of quarrying associated to Balado Quarry, a well-established quarry west of Kinross. As you will have seen, an update was published in relation to the position relative flood risk, but that does not change the recommendation. I'll now again take you through a series of slides to give you some detail and context to the proposal. First slide, please. So this first image shows an aerial view outlining in red the extent of the site, its location related to Kinross and the M80, together with its positioning between the A977 and B918. The existing and previous areas of quarrying are to the east or right and south of Balado Airfield. Next slide, please. This plan shows the proposed extension area, the orange line sitting within the red site boundary. It also identifies the relationship with the wider quarry areas and shows landscaped areas as well as a number of surrounding properties to the west and south. Next slide, please. This more detailed plan shows the phase 1 area and associated planting and bunding. The INEOS pipeline runs beyond the northwest boundary. Next slide, please. Here we see the phase 2 area and reinstated phase 1. Next slide, please. Here we see the restoration plan. Next and final slide. So here we can see some sections within the various levels associated to the existing excavated and restored arrangements. I appreciate that that's not particularly visible in the slide itself, but I'm sure you'll have had the opportunity to look at it online. We now move to a series of photographs which show the situation recently. This first photo looks from the northernmost of those properties, which is Balado Home Farm, and looks north into the area proposed for quarrying. Next slide. We then look east from roughly the same spot over the existing quarried area. Next photo, please. Then a view further north across the area to be quarried. And the final photograph moves us to the north of the phase 1 area, looking south across the area to be quarried. Thank you, Convener. This now concludes the presentation and return to the plan showing the proposed quarrying zone and areas previously quarried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Do we have any questions for officers? Apologise here, my sheet has not been updated properly. We have a deputation, so I'll hand over to the Vice Convener to ask the deputation to speak. Thank you.
Can I ask Mr. Booth to approach? Good afternoon, Mr. Booth. I'm sure you're aware of the process. 10 minutes to talk. I'll give you a prompt after a minute. Or a minute to go, sorry.
Good afternoon. I was largely happy with the officer's report, and I largely represent. I asked to speak just in case there were any questions and in case there was any objections, although none have actually been made with respect to the application. The one point I feel that it is pertinent to make in respect to conversations that have been had already is the area part of the area, 5 hectares, does relate to prime agricultural land. Within the officer's report, it's not completely clear, and it justifies the loss of land. It doesn't actually be quite specific in that it's progressive restoration. That land about 5 hectares, will be out of agricultural production over that period, but is being restored to agricultural land. It will go back to arable, will go back to crops, so there is no loss of arable land in the long term. It's a fairly short-term temporary loss in that respect. That's the only thing I have to say. Thank you. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to cover them.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Mine was intended for officers, but I'll ask one anyway, just to keep you entertained. The 2004 application had a restoration plan, I believe. What's happened to that? And you mentioned that this is going to be restored to agricultural land. I believe that restoration plan was to make it into lakes and a park for visitors and tourists and so on. So how's that going to tie in with what you're planning with this particular piece of ground? The overall restoration plan for the existing site remains the same as was shown in the plan that was up earlier on. The application just now relates to about 8 hectares, 5 of which is agricultural to the land, which is effectively out with the current planning permission area. That area is going back to agriculture. The rest of it will go back to pretty much exactly as before. The only difference is sand and gravel has been taken out of about 3 hectares on the very edge of the existing planning permission area. So there's the restoration in terms of woodland planting, etc. That's all going to be the same. The walkways, etc. They will all still remain. Oh, sorry. If I can ask a supplementary, the land surrounds Blado Home Farm. I presume the residents there are content with what you're doing. Yes, Blado Home Cottages and Blado Home Farm are both owned by the applicant, and as you'll be aware, there's been no objections from any of the current tenants.
Councillor Waters.
Councillor Cuthbert kind of covered my question, but just a small follow-on to that. Has the restoration work started, or when is it expected to start on the earlier phases?
The restoration works have started to a large extent because it's water bodies. These don't have a huge amount of restoration to them. A lot of the planting has been undertaken, and there are further soil works and planting works just round about the edge of the water bodies that are proposed during this season.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Booth, there appears to be no further questions. You're free to go. And I'll hand you back to the convener.
Thank you. Now it's questions for officers. Does anyone have questions for officers? Councillor James, you put an M. Motion.
Yeah, for a motion, convener.
Which is?
To accept the report as is. Can't believe not a single objection or anything else, and I think we should just accept our officer's recommendation.
Councillor Cuthbert, you seconded it?
Thank you, convener. Yes, I think it is extraordinary. It's Kinross. It's a quarry. It's a large application. There's no objections at all, so I'm more than happy to second this.
I don't suppose there will be an amendment. No. Do any members want to comment on the report? Councillor Waters.
Just a very quick comment. This you know, in 6 years representing Kinross, I haven't had any complaints about the quarry. It seems to run smoothly, and even having friends that stay at Blado right next to it, they had very initial fears when it started up, but they say there's been no issues that they've reported in the whole time with the quarry running. So more than happy that this has been passed.
Thank you. That means the application is granted subject to the grounds detailed in the report of handling. Thank you. Right, we'll swiftly move on. The next application is a Section 42 application to modify Condition 10 noise mitigation of permission for Morris Leslie, Errol Aylesfield, Grange, Errol. And to introduce the report is Mr. Panton. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Firstly, I would draw members' attention to the circulated amendment. Condition 10 has been reworded following further consultation with both the agent and the Council's environmental health team. So moving on, as stated, this is a Section 42 application to modify Condition 10 of the planning permission. Condition 10 required the implementation of noise mitigation measures prior to the occupation of any dwelling house. The applicant wishes to amend the condition to reduce the height of the required bund and to remove the acoustic fence. An updated noise impact assessment accompanies the application. Next slide, please. This image shows the location of the site. The site is bound to the north by the C484 Errol to Grange Road, to the east by the remaining airfield area, and to the west by a burn and farmland. The south of the site is contained by reed beds and the River Tay, which is a designated special protection area. Next slide, please. Here we have the proposed site plan showing the bund under question. The bund is a dark green strip that runs along the site boundary near the area identified as the local park. You can also see some sectional views of the bund to the right of the plan. Next slide, please. This first image shows the grain plant, Errol Granary, in which the bund, in part, was to protect amenity from. The applicant, Maurice Leslie, now has this building under their ownership, therefore the impacts from this facility are no longer as much of a concern. Next slide, please. This image again shows the grain plant and its relationship to the development site, which is to the right. Next image, please. This photograph is taken from the site of the grain plant towards the development site itself. Part of the bund will be located here. You can see the doctor's surgery, which is the white building in the distance. The dwelling house to the top right will be viewed in greater detail in the next image. Next image, please. Here we have a closer shot of the dwelling which was shown in the last photograph, taken from the doctor's surgery. Next image, please. This final photograph shows material which is in part to be used for the bund under question. Next slide, please. Thank you, Convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with a proposed site plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Panton. Do we have any questions for officers? Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Just very briefly, going to the grain dryer. Grain dryers can make really quite loud noise, and you're stating is now under the ownership of the applicant, and they will be installing silencers. Now, just could you clarify that the noise impact assessment will have fully taken this into account? I mean, a silencer, does it mean it will be silenced or it'll just be less?
I believe Lynn's on the call. Could you take that one?
Yep, the noise consultant for the applicant submitted an updated noise impact assessment, and we are satisfied that the noise from the grain dryers with the silencers will not adversely affect the residential amenity of the dwelling houses. And also, just to say as well that there is a condition set with the grain dryer site with regards to NR curves from noise from the equipment as well. So we are satisfied that there shouldn't be any issues with regards to noise. I hope that answers your question, Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. I'm just the concern of it would be a resident who would have to raise the issue if the silencers, when grain dryers can run throughout the night, you know, it's not just during the day process. So it was really just to ensure that there was no antisocial prospect of antisocial disturbance for residents.
Okay. I see there are no more questions. Can I therefore ask the committee if we agree the paper the way how it is? Agreed. Thank you. Then the application is approved, subject to the conditions detailed in the report of handling. Thank you. Now, we move on to local applications. Does the committee want to have a break at this point, or do we want to just carry on? For me, I'd rather carry on, but.
Convener, I think we've got officers who would normally have a lunch break at this point. I think it's only fair on our officers that we perhaps break for lunch.
Yeah. Okay, half an hour. We'll take half an hour then.
Thank you.
45 minutes then. Right. Back here at 2 o'clock. Thank you.